What's up, guys? Welcome to The Fiction Wizard. We've got something special today. Hedwig's magic shattered 48 loyalty blocks on Harry and revealed he's Lord of 7 stolen houses. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The night the owl screamed the summer heat at number 4, Privet Drive had the particular quality of cruelty that only Surrey could manage, thick, airless, and smelling faintly of lawn fertilizer and the Dursley's Sunday roast. Harry lay on his back on his narrow bed, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that had been there since he was 9, listening to Uncle Vernon snore through the wall like something dying slowly and without dignity. It was 2 in the morning. He hadn't slept. This wasn't unusual. Sleep had been a negotiation ever since Voldemort had come back wearing a resurrected body and murdered Cedric Diggory in front of him. Harry had learned to doze in short, shallow increments, always with one hand near his wand, always with one ear tuned to the world outside his door. The Dursleys thought this was freakishness. Harry had stopped caring what the Dursleys thought somewhere around the age of 8. Hedwig was awake too. She sat on her perch near the window, white as moonlight, watching him with those amber eyes that had always seemed to understand more than an owl had any right to. She'd been restless all week, shifting on her perch, clicking her beak at nothing, ruffling her feathers and then smoothing them in a gesture Harry had learned to read as something close to agitation. He'd assumed she was bored. Owls got bored. He'd been keeping her in because the Ministry had made it abundantly clear that any independent movement from Harry's owl would be logged and scrutinized, and he wasn't in the mood for another formal warning about underage magic. "Go back to sleep," he told her, without much conviction. Hedwig turned her head away from him, toward the window, and made a sound he had never heard her make before. It wasn't a hoot. It wasn't the sharp bark she used when she was annoyed with him. It was something lower, something that seemed to come from deep in her chest, resonant and deliberate, like a single-struck note from an instrument he couldn't name. Harry sat up. The sound didn't stop. It built, slowly, the way pressure builds in a room before a storm breaks through the glass. Hedwig's feathers were standing on end now, every one of them, and her wings had spread slightly at her sides though she hadn't moved from her perch. The amber in her eyes had gone strange, brighter than it should have been in the dark room, lit from within, like something old had woken up behind them. "Hedwig," Harry said, and he heard his own voice come out careful and quiet, the way you speak near something you don't want to startle. "Hey. What's wrong?" She looked at him then. Directly at him. And she screamed. It wasn't an owl sound at all. It cracked through the room like something breaking, sharp and clear and impossibly loud, and Harry threw himself backward instinctively, his hand going for his wand, but the sound had already hit him. Not physically. Not the way a sound usually hits. This went somewhere deeper, somewhere underneath the skin, underneath the bone, into whatever part of a person carries their magic, and Harry felt it, burning. He gasped. His hands flew to his chest without thinking, pressing flat against his sternum like he could hold himself together, because it felt like something was tearing, not painfully, or not exactly, but the way scar tissue tears when it finally gives way after years of holding wrong. Like a release that hurts because the holding had been so long. His vision went white at the edges. He could hear his blood. The first one snapped. He felt it go. Something that had been wound tight around his magical core, he hadn't known it was there, had never felt it because he'd never known anything different, the way you don't notice the weight of the air until someone removes the ceiling, gave way with a sensation like a whip crack inside his chest. Then another. Then 2 at once. Then 5 in rapid succession, each one releasing a wave of heat that rolled outward from his core and pressed against his skin from the inside. He was on the floor. He didn't remember getting there. He was on his hands and knees on the thin carpet with his head bowed and his wand somewhere behind him, and Hedwig was screaming, 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 and the things were snapping, one after another, dozens of them, and with each one Harry remembered something. Not memories that had been taken. Feelings. The 7th block went and Harry suddenly knew he should have been able to feel Voldemort's emotions from a mile away rather than a room. The 12th, and he understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that accidental magic had not stopped happening to him at age 11, it had been redirected, siphoned away through the loyalty blocks and fed into enchantments he hadn't consented to and couldn't see. The 19th, and a door opened in the back of his mind that he hadn't known was locked, and through it came the unmistakable sensation of 7 rings, 7 distinct magical signatures, each one ancient and enormous and precisely tuned to his blood, waiting. By the time the 48th block shattered, Harry was sitting with his back against his bed frame, knees pulled up, breathing hard, and every book in his room was 3 inches off the shelves. The silence afterward was extraordinary. Like the silence after a thunderclap, when the world is still deciding what to do next. Harry looked at his hands. On the ring finger of his right hand, something was forming, not materializing exactly, more like condensing, the way frost forms on glass, a shape assembling itself from ambient magic that had apparently been waiting 17 years for permission to arrive. It was a ring. Dark metal, old enough that it had its own gravity, set with a stone the deep red of something that had cooled from fire. The Potter crest etched into its face was so fine and precise it looked like it had been cut by someone who had all the time in the world. Then a second, on his index finger, right hand. Black metal, cooler in tone. The black crest, the serpent and the 2 stars above it. Then a third, and a fourth, and the books fell off the shelves entirely because Harry's magic was doing something it had never done unsupervised, expanding outward like breath after years of shallow breathing, and Hedwig landed on his knee, just dropped straight down from her perch onto his knee, her talons gentle, and pressed her head against his jaw. He put his arm around her without thinking. "What did you do?" he whispered. She clicked her beak once, soft and satisfied. He sat there on his floor in the dark with 7 rings assembling themselves on his fingers and his magic filling the room like water fills a shape it's been given, and for the first time in his life Harry Potter felt exactly the size he actually was. It was terrifying. It was the most natural thing he had ever felt. The clock on his wall said 3:47 a.m. By 4:30, when the eastern sky had begun to suggest the idea of morning without committing to it, Harry had written 12 letters. His handwriting was steadier than usual, which surprised him. His hand should have been shaking, but there was a quality to his movement now that hadn't been there before, a certainty, like his body had decided it was done apologizing for existing. The letters went to Gringotts, to the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement, to the Wisengamot's administrative office, to the office of the magical solicitor his parents had apparently retained on his behalf, a fact he had only just accessed from the knowledge unlocked by the 23rd loyalty block, and to 3 individuals whose names had surfaced from the same source, people who had owed the Potter family magical debts that had been quietly buried under layers of political convenience. He did not write to Dumbledore. He did not write to Ron. He stared at a fresh sheet of parchment for a long time, quill hovering, thinking about Hermione, and then set the quill down and put that thought away for later. Later, when he had the full picture. Later, when he knew exactly how deep this went, and who had known, and who hadn't. The rings on his fingers were warm. He counted them again, because he kept needing to confirm that they were real: Potter, Black, Peverell, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Gaunt, and Ravenclaw. 7 rings. 7 houses. 7 seals on 7 sets of holdings, seats, vaults, magical contracts, and political positions that someone, several someones, working with precision and patience, had spent 17 years slowly, quietly, legally stealing from a child who didn't know they existed. Harry looked at the Slytherin ring for a long time. It was the most surprising of them, silver grey, cold to the touch where the others were warm, the serpent crest coiled around a stone that was the color of deep water. He understood, from the knowledge now available to him, what had happened. When Voldemort's killing curse had hit him as an infant, it had not simply failed. It had inverted. The magical backlash hadn't just destroyed Voldemort's body, it had transferred a significant portion of Voldemort's accumulated magical legacy, including his claim to the Slytherin line which he had established through years of deliberate magical conquest, backward through the curse. Into Harry. Into a 1-year-old boy who had no idea he was inheriting the ruin of the most feared dark wizard in a century. The gaunt ring had come through the same channel, by similar logic, a conquered claim, transferred by the mechanics of a killing curse turned inside out. He supposed Dumbledore had known. He was working on the assumption, based on everything unlocked in the last hour, that Dumbledore had known most things. The question was what to do with that, and Harry had decided, sitting on his floor with 7 rings and a furious owl, that he was not going to be angry about it in an uncontrolled way. Anger was a useful tool. He had learned, tonight, that almost everything could be a useful tool if you held it correctly. The 7th ring, Ravenclaw, had surprised him most emotionally. His mother. He hadn't known anything about his mother's family, not really, beyond the bare fact of her being Muggle-born and Evans before she was Potter. The block on that knowledge had apparently been the most recent installation, placed, according to the residue of its magical signature, 8 years ago. After Harry had already come to Hogwarts. After he was already in the system, already sorted, already framed by everyone around him. Someone had gone back and added that one later. Someone who had gotten nervous. Someone who had realized that the Ravenclaw connection was the thread that, if pulled, unraveled too much. He didn't know yet who had placed that specific block. But he had a feeling the name would surface once he was inside Gringotts. He was looking forward to it. Outside, the first bird had started up in the hedge, the cheerful lunatic optimism of a blackbird claiming the morning before anyone else. Harry stood, and his shadow in the grey light was longer than he expected somehow, broader, and he thought distantly that this must be what it felt like to be the right size. He had spent so long accommodating himself to the shape of the space he'd been given, the cupboard under the stairs, the thin bedroom, the narrow identity of hero or problem child or the boy who lived, that he had forgotten there was supposed to be more of him. There was considerably more of him. He looked at Hedwig. She had returned to her perch and was watching him with that ancient calm she'd always had, the amber eyes steady and knowing in the growing light. "You've been waiting to do that, haven't you?" he said. Not a question. She ruffled her feathers once, which he took for yes. "How long?" She looked at him with an expression that, on an owl, communicated something remarkably close to "you wouldn't believe me if I told you." He laughed. It came out rougher than he intended, scratched around the edges by a sleepless night and the aftermath of 48 consecutive explosions in his magical core, but it was real. He couldn't remember the last time a laugh had come out of him that was genuinely unperformed. He walked over and held his arm out, and Hedwig stepped onto it with the precise dignity of someone who has been managing someone else's affairs for a very long time and is finally seeing their work pay off. "Right," he said. "Okay. We're going to Diagon Alley today." The issue of transport was, briefly, the most mundane obstacle he'd encountered in several extraordinary hours. He was still theoretically under Dumbledore's watch, still technically under Ministry observation for underage magic, though the Ministry's monitoring system, he now understood, had been specifically calibrated over the years to miss certain things in Harry's vicinity, calibrated by someone with access to Ministry systems and a vested interest in Harry not knowing his own power. That access had a name. That name was connected to several others. He was filing all of it away with the methodical patience of someone who has finally decided to think rather than react. He didn't take the night bus. The night bus was loud, visible, and logged by the Ministry because Stan Shunpike had never quite understood that confidentiality was a service option. Harry packed a bag with the economy of someone who had learned to move quickly. His trunk could be retrieved later, through proper channels, through people who owed him things, and then stood in the middle of his room and considered the question of apparition. He was 17 in 3 weeks. Technically, he could not legally apparate. Also technically, with 48 loyalty blocks removed and his full magical capacity restored, the Ministry's trace on him had just become significantly more complicated to enforce, because the trace worked by detecting magical signatures above a certain threshold, and that threshold had been calibrated to Harry's artificially suppressed output. His real output, his full output, was several orders of magnitude larger. The trace would read him as an adult wizard. It would have no choice. He apparat to the leaky cauldron without making a sound. Tom, the barman, was setting up for the day when Harry walked in through the back, out of the alley-facing door, and Tom looked up and then looked again, the way you look twice at something that occupies more space than your brain initially filed it under. Harry was used to being looked at. He was not used to being looked at like this, like whatever Tom's eyes had expected to find had not matched what they'd found, like there was a quality to Harry's presence this morning that rewrote the initial read. "Mr. Potter," Tom said, carefully. "Morning," Harry said. "I need a room until Gringotts opens. And breakfast, if that's not too much trouble." He set a galleon on the bar. Tom looked at the rings on Harry's fingers. His expression went through several things in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, something that looked very much like old instinctive deference, the kind baked in by generations of living near people with house rings who knew what those rings meant. "Right away," Tom said, and did not ask any questions at all. The room was small and smelled of old wood and candle smoke, which Harry found more comfortable than the antiseptic chemical clean of the Desleys' house. He sat in the chair by the window with a plate of eggs and toast he barely touched, watching the alley below begin to fill with early morning traffic. Witches and wizards going about their mornings, none of them knowing. He turned the Potter ring around his finger. Thought about his father, who had apparently had an estate plan comprehensive enough to retain a solicitor and list specific provisions for Harry, provisions that had been quietly and legally nullified by someone with Wisengamot access and the political connections to make nullification look like administrative inevitability. He thought about his mother, whose Ravenclaw connection had been blocked 8 years ago. After Hogwarts. After sorting. Which meant someone had known he was at school, known he was being sorted into Gryffindor, where the Gryffindor claim was relatively safe to leave visible because Dumbledore was Gryffindor's man and could manage it, and panicked about the Ravenclaw thread. Someone had acted to suppress it. Someone with both the knowledge and the access. The list of people with that specific combination was very short. He wasn't angry. That surprised him, still. He had expected, when the blocks came down, to feel the kind of rage that eats you from the inside, the hot, formless fury of a child who has been used. And there was something underneath the clarity, something deep and old and genuinely furious, but it wasn't running him. It was fueling him. There was a difference, and the difference felt important. Hedwig sat on the headboard of the bed he wasn't using and watched him with the amber eyes that were still just slightly too bright, still carrying that quality of something vast and ancient temporarily folded into owl shape. He had thought about that, in the hours on the floor. He had access now to the knowledge that his family had maintained a familiar bond for 7 generations, not a spell exactly, more a living magical agreement between the Potter bloodline and a guardian entity that had chosen the form of an owl as its preferred expression. Hedwig was not simply his owl. She was, in the precise language of magical contract law, his bonded familiar guardian, and the implications of that were significant enough that he had put them on a separate mental shelf to examine once the immediate business was done. What he did know, from the unlocked knowledge, was that familiars of her type were physically incapable of allowing harm to come to their bonded if they had the power to prevent it. And the loyalty blocks had been harm, slow, cumulative, deliberate harm that suppressed and redirected and contained. She had been trying to break them for years. He suspected the timing of tonight's success had something to do with his proximity to his 17th birthday and the corresponding shift in magical majority thresholds. The blocks had been designed to hold through childhood. They had not been designed to hold against a familiar guardian working in the window of transition between child and adult magic. Someone had made an oversight. He was glad. Gringotts opened at 9. Harry was standing outside the bronze doors at 8:55, which gave the goblin doorman 6 minutes of trying to decide how to categorize the teenager with 7 house rings on his fingers and an expression that indicated he was not there to browse. Harry watched the goblin's eyes track across the rings, and the goblin was good, professional, the flicker of recognition was barely there, and then Harry nodded pleasantly, as an equal to another equal, and waited. At 9 on the dot, the doors opened. The interior of Gringotts at opening time had a quality of controlled industry that Harry had always found obscurely impressive. Goblins moved between the high marble counters with the efficiency of people who have been in the business of money and power for long enough that both have ceased to impress them, which Harry now understood was a perspective he could relate to somewhat. He walked to the nearest available teller and set his right hand flat on the marble counter, the 7 rings visible. The goblin behind the counter was named Sharpclaw, according to the placard, and Sharpclaw took one look at Harry's hand and one look at Harry's face and said, very quietly, "One moment, Mr. Potter," and disappeared through a door behind the counter at a pace considerably faster than the standard goblin processing trot. He came back with another goblin, older, with the kind of face that suggested it had seen centuries of human foolishness and had reached a state of pure philosophical acceptance about the whole business. This one wore a different coat, dark green rather than black, with small silver buttons. "Lord Potter," this goblin said. Harry registered the title, filed it appropriately, didn't flinch. "I am Ragnarok, Senior Accounts Manager for the Potter Family Trust. We have been," and here something moved across the goblin's face that Harry could only describe as the goblin equivalent of deeply, professionally furious, expecting this communication for some time. "I imagine you have," Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in the goblin's expression, not warmth exactly, but the specific recognition of one professional acknowledging another. "If you would follow me, my lord. We have much to discuss." The room they went to was deeper inside Gringotts than Harry had ever been, past the processing halls and the entrance to the cart tracks, through a corridor that sloped downward and then leveled into a broad, low-ceilinged chamber lined with filing cabinets that seemed to go back further than the room's exterior dimensions should have allowed. There was a table in the center, dark stone, and chairs, and on the table there was already a stack of parchment 3 inches thick. Harry sat down. Ragnarok sat across from him. 2 other goblins stood along the wall, and one of them was holding what appeared to be a pensieve, which was not standard for Gringotts business meetings. "Before we begin," Ragnarok said, "I want to be clear about Gringotts' position. We are aware that irregularities have existed in the management of your accounts and the administration of your inheritances. We have been aware for some time." "How long?" Harry asked. "Since the day the accounts were altered," Ragnarok said flatly. "We flagged them. We sent formal communications to your designated magical guardian. Those communications were filed and not acted upon. We sent secondary communications to the Ministry's Department of Magical Guardianship. Those communications were," another controlled flicker of something hot behind the goblin's eyes, "redirected. To Dumbledore. To the office of the Chief Warlock, yes." Harry looked at the pensieve. "What's that for?" "We thought," Ragnarok said, with the careful phrasing of someone who has clearly thought about this moment, "that you would prefer to see, rather than simply be told. The magical record of the alterations. Who performed them? When? In what capacity? The records exist, Lord Potter, because Gringotts records everything. We do not selectively preserve. It is our policy, and it is why, I suspect, the individuals involved chose to use legal channels rather than approach us directly. They knew we would have the record and they calculated, correctly, that you would never have the standing to access it. Because I didn't know the accounts existed." "Precisely. But I have standing now." "You have full standing now," Ragnarok confirmed. 7 times over. He looked at the rings on Harry's hand, and his expression held something that Harry was fairly certain was the closest goblins got to satisfaction. "We are ready to proceed whenever you are, Lord Potter." Harry looked at the stack of parchment. He looked at the pensieve. Outside, far above, London was going about its Tuesday morning with no idea that in a room below a bank in the middle of the city, a 17-year-old was about to find out the full scope of what had been done to him. He thought of Cedric. He thought of Sirius, falling through the veil, and how Harry had been positioned to feel the grief but had been blocked from using it, blocked from transforming it into the kind of focused clarity that should have been available to the lord of a noble and ancient house. Someone had made sure his grief stayed grief and never became anger with direction. Someone had thought of everything. He was here now. Start from the beginning, Harry said. Ragnarok nodded once and gestured to the goblin with the pensieve. The surface of the pensieve began to glow silver white, and a scene emerged, not quite a memory, more a magical record, with the cold precision of something that had been captured without interpretation. A room. An office. Several people around a table. Documents being signed. And there, at the head of the table, in robes of deep purple, with half-moon spectacles and an expression of absolute certainty about his own righteousness, was Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry watched. He didn't move. His hands were flat on the stone table, the 7 rings catching the silver light, and his face was still and clear and not angry in any wild way, and not frightened, and not the face of someone who needed anyone else to tell him what to do. The pensieve showed him everything. The forged codicil to Sirius's will, completed within 48 hours of Sirius's death, before Harry had stopped crying. The redirected Ravenclaw inheritance documents, shuffled through a subcommittee of the Wisengamot that met at 8 in the morning and voted on 100 things in 2 hours. The Peveril claim, buried under a reclassification of dormant bloodline assets as Ministry historical artifacts, literally reclassified as objects, removed from the category of living inheritance and therefore beyond Harry's reach. The Slytherin and Gaunt claims, which had been the most legally creative theft of all, reclassified as dark artifacts in government custody through a ministry edict signed by Fudge and co-drafted by someone Harry recognized from the Wisengamot photographs he'd seen in the Daily Prophet. Loyalties, all of it. Legitimized theft dressed in parliamentary procedure, signed off by people who had told themselves it was for the greater good. When the pensieve's glow faded, Ragnarok was watching him. Names, Harry said. Just the one word. Ragnarok produced the first page of the parchment stack and turned it to face him. There was a list, neat and ordered. 7 names, with roles and actions noted beside each. 6 of them Harry had suspected in various degrees. The 7th was a surprise, not a shock, not the gut-punch kind, but the cold specific surprise of a detail that recontextualized something you thought you'd already understood. He read the list twice. Memorized it. Did not allow his expression to give anything to the room beyond focused attention. I want full account reclamations across all 7 houses, he said. I want every transfer, every redirection, every reclassification reversed. I understand some of this will require Wisengamot action. Some, Ragnarok confirmed. The Peveril reclassification in particular. The ministry will need to be formally challenged. I have 36 Wisengamot votes, Harry said. This came from the unlocked knowledge, smooth as anything. Between the 7 houses. 22 direct seats and 14 proxy seats through affiliated family alliances. He watched Ragnarok's expression. How many does Dumbledore control? Ragnarok considered him for a moment. Currently, between his own seat, the order of affiliated families, and the political relationships he's maintained over 60 years? Approximately 30. So he has more. He has more, Ragnarok agreed. But not all of his relationships will hold once the record of these transactions becomes public. Several of those families were told, and here Ragnarok's tone went very dry, that the alterations to your estates were made at your own request. That you had been consulted. Harry was very still for a moment. When I was a child, he said. They were told I'd consented to this. You were an infant when most of it began, Ragnarok said. The later alterations, they were told you had been consulted as a young adult. That you had chosen to defer certain holdings to ministry administration. Harry thought about the 7th ring, the Ravenclaw claim, blocked 8 years ago. He had been 10 years old. Someone had told the Wiesengemot that a 10-year-old had consented to defer his maternal inheritance to ministry administration. He kept his voice level. I want certified copies of all of this. Every document, every record, every pensive extract that Gringotts can legally certify. And I want them today. They will be ready within the hour, Ragnarok said, without a flicker of hesitation. Good. Harry stood, and the room seemed to adjust to accommodate him standing in it, the way rooms adjust to weather. One more thing. Hedwig, my familiar. I want Gringotts to formally register the familiar bond under the Potter family trust. As a living magical asset, not a creature. I want her legal status documented. Ragnarok looked at him. For the first time in the meeting, something crossed the goblin's face that was unmistakably genuine, not professional, not calculated. Respect. The kind you don't perform. We will do so immediately, Ragnarok said. The last time a Potter familiar guardian was registered with us was in 1748. We are pleased to do so again. Harry picked up the preliminary copies of the account documents and folded them into his jacket pocket. The 7 rings caught the lamplight as he moved and threw small patterns of colored light across the stone floor, red for Potter, silver for Black, pale gold for Peveril, deep gold for Gryffindor, cold gray for Slytherin, dark green for Gaunt, and a clear, striking blue for Ravenclaw. He thought of his mother, who had come from somewhere with a thread to Ravenclaw that had been deemed dangerous enough to suppress. He thought of her bright eyes in the photographs he'd seen, eyes that people always said he had inherited, green as something growing, alive. He thought of a woman who had died casting a protection so powerful it had broken the most feared dark wizard in a century, and he thought that maybe the magic that had done that, the particular quality of it, hadn't come from nowhere at all. He thought he would very much like to know more about her. And now, for the first time, there was nothing stopping him. He left Gringotts at 10:30 with certified documents in his possession, Hedwig flying loose above the alley for the first time all summer, and a clarity of purpose that felt nothing like the way he'd walked into situations before, that old mixture of determination and dread, the sense of being pushed into battles that were never quite his own. This felt different. This felt chosen. The sun was fully up over Diagon Alley. Witches and wizards passed him on the cobblestones, most not looking, a few looking twice at the boy with 7 rings who walked through the alley like the alley belonged to him, which, in several significant legal senses, it now did. His letter to Dumbledore, he decided, would be delivered through Gringotts' official communication channel, registered, sealed, and time-stamped. Not as a courtesy. As a record. It would say simply, I know. I am coming. He looked up. Hedwig was a white shape against the blue sky, circling the alley with the ease of something moving through air it owns. She banked once, looked down at him, and made the sound she made when she was satisfied, soft, low, private. Just for him. Yeah, Harry said, to no one, to the morning, to the 7 houses and the 48 broken chains and the long, clear road opening up in front of him. Yeah. Let's go. Chapter 2, The Reckoning at Gringotts. The certified documents were heavier than they looked. Harry had taken them back to his room at the Leaky Cauldron and spread them across the bed, and spent the next 2 hours doing something he'd never had much practice at, reading carefully. Not the skimming he'd done with textbooks, catching enough to get through an exam. Reading the way his mother's Ravenclaw blood apparently demanded he read, which was slowly, completely, turning each page with the specific attention of someone who understands that words on parchment are weapons, and you don't handle weapons carelessly. Ragnarok had sent an assistant with the full certified bundle at 11 on the dot, a young goblin named Firethorn who had the professional blankness of someone doing their first important assignment and desperately not showing it. Firethorn had also brought a secondary envelope, sealed in Gringotts' official black wax, which contained a single additional document that Ragnarok had not mentioned in the meeting. Harry had opened that one first. It was a letter, not a legal document. Old parchment, written in a hand he recognized from the photographs in old order records he'd glimpsed at Grimmauld Place, his father's handwriting, angular and slightly too large, the handwriting of someone who wrote fast because thinking slowly wasn't something he'd ever mastered. Harry, if you're reading this, then either I'm dead, which, given the war, is probable, or something has gone sufficiently wrong that Gringotts has activated the secondary disclosure. Either way, I'm sorry I can't be there to give this to you myself. The Peveril claim is the important one. When you have it fully, and the rings, you'll understand what the cloak was. Not a heirloom. A marker. A seal. The cloak was the Peveril house's way of telling its lord, we remember you. Don't be angry at everyone. Save it for the people who deserve it. You'll know who they are. Your mum wants to add something but I've told her there isn't room. She's ignoring me. That's her handwriting in the margin. And in the margin, in small, precise letters, in a hand that was nothing like James Potter's sprawl, there's always room. Ravenclaw Principle Number 1. Harry, the houses remember you because the magic remembers. You don't have to earn what's already yours. Mum. Harry had sat with that letter for a long time. Long enough that his tea went cold and Hedwig, who had come through the window after her circuit of the alley, made a pointed sound about the untouched breakfast tray. Then he folded the letter, put it in his inside jacket pocket, next to his chest, and went back to the documents. By 1 in the afternoon he had mapped the full scope of it, and the scope was extraordinary in the particular way that extraordinary things are when they're also comprehensively, systematically illegal. House Potter had been the simplest theft, in terms of mechanism. His parents' personal estates, separate from the family vault, which Dumbledore couldn't touch because it required a blood key, had been filed through probate in a process that had moved at remarkable speed in the weeks immediately following their deaths. Properties, investment holdings, library assets, a collection of magical artifacts that apparently filled 3 rooms of Potter Manor, all of it filed as requiring ministry protective custody while the heir was a minor, pending appointment of a proper magical guardian. The appointment of Albus Dumbledore as Harry's guardian had come through on the same day as the protective custody order, and the custody had then simply never been lifted. There had never been a review. There had never been a hearing. A child had come of age and no one had told him he had a house full of his parents' things sitting in ministry storage with paperwork that said pending. House Black had been more creative. Sirius had been in Azkaban when Harry was an infant, and whatever will existed at that point had been inaccessible. When Sirius died, there had been a will. Harry had known this, had been told by Dumbledore that Sirius had left everything to him, but what he hadn't been told was that a codicil had been filed 46 hours after Sirius's death, in the name of the Black family's magical executor, citing a provision of the Ancient Houses Act that allowed a house executor to override a will if the named heir was deemed unable to exercise responsible management of house assets. Harry had read that paragraph 3 times. Unable to exercise responsible management. He had been 15 years old, in the middle of a war, and someone had filed a legal document saying he was incapable of managing his own inheritance. The executor who had signed the codicil was not Sirius's choice of executor. The name on that document was one of the 7 names on Ragnarok's list. He would be coming back to that name. The Peveril, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Gaunt, and Ravenclaw claims were progressively more complex and progressively more revealing about the sophistication of the operation, because by the time someone was engineering the theft of a dormant ancient house's bloodline claim, they were not operating on instinct. They were operating on research, on legal expertise, on a thorough understanding of both magical inheritance law and the gaps in Wisengamot oversight that opened up when decisions were made at subcommittee level before dawn. Someone had put real work into this. Years of it. And the thing that settled in Harry's chest, cold and specific, was the recognition that this work had begun before he was old enough to walk. Some of it had begun before he was born. This had not been opportunistic. Someone had looked at the Potter bloodline, understood what it carried, and planned. He ate the cold toast standing up. Thought about the letter in his pocket. Thought about his mother writing in the margin, ignoring his father's claim that there wasn't room, and the specific quality of that, the warmth of it, the ordinariness, the realness of two people who had loved each other and loved him and had still died before he could know them, and he let himself feel it for exactly the count of 10. Then he put it away and thought about what to do next. The afternoon answer came from an unexpected direction. He had been sitting with the documents, cross-referencing the names on the list with his Wiesengemot vote count, when there was a knock at his door, not the tentative, apologetic knock of Tom the barman, but a sharp, confident double rap that suggested whoever was outside had not come to apologize for the inconvenience. Harry picked up his wand. Old habit. He set it down again after a moment, because his magic was doing something it hadn't done yesterday. It was giving him information. Not consciously, not in words, but in the way you know the temperature of a room when you walk into it. Whoever was outside the door was not hostile. They were agitated, but the agitation had the quality of excitement, not aggression. He opened the door. Neville Longbottom was standing in the corridor holding a copy of the Daily Prophet and looking like he had run at least part of the way here. "I thought it was you," Neville said. He was breathing harder than usual, and his face had the specific expression of someone who has just had a very large suspicion confirmed. "Tom said you were staying. I was coming for herbology supplies and I thought, and then I saw this." He thrust the Prophet at Harry. Harry took it. The front page was not about him, which was mildly surprising. It was about a Wiesengemot procedural vote that had apparently produced an unexpected result, something about House representation thresholds. Harry read the relevant paragraph and understood immediately. The article didn't know why the threshold vote had shifted, because whoever wrote it didn't know that 7 houses had just rematerialized into active status overnight and were now, according to the magical registry, casting their full Wiesengemot weight. The threshold had shifted because the total number of active house seats had just increased by 36. "Come in," Harry said. Neville came in, and his eyes moved immediately to the spread of documents on the bed, and then to Harry's hands, and the 7 rings, and his expression went very still in the way that Neville's expression sometimes did when something was significant enough that he needed a moment to catch up. Neville was not slow. That was one of the things that Harry had always understood about him that other people consistently missed. Neville was thorough. He needed to be sure before he reacted, and most people mistook that for slowness. "How many?" Neville said. 7. Neville sat down in the chair by the window and looked at the rings for a long time without speaking. "Gran used to say," Neville began, and then stopped. "Reorganized. She used to say that the reason things were so wrong in magical Britain wasn't Voldemort. She said Voldemort was a symptom. That the actual disease was what was happening to the houses. The old ones, the real ones. Being hollowed out. She said it started after the First War, and she couldn't get anyone to listen." "She was right," Harry said. Neville looked up. "How long have you known?" "Since about 3 in the morning." Something moved across Neville's face, the specific combination of fury and relief that happens when you've been worried about something for a long time and found out you were right to worry. "What are you going to do today?" "Go back to Gringotts. Meet with Ragnarok again. This morning was the audit. This afternoon is the strategy." Harry looked at him. "You can come if you want." Neville didn't ask if Harry was sure. He didn't perform hesitation or check whether he was needed. He just said, "Right," and stood up. This was why Neville was the person Harry called on. They walked to Gringotts through the mid-afternoon crowds of Diagon Alley, and if people noticed them they didn't say anything, though Harry caught more than one pair of eyes dropping to his hands and then rising to his face with an expression of recalculation. The rings were not subtle. That was the point of them. Ancient house rings were never designed to be unobtrusive. They were, in the old magical tradition, declarations. They said, "This person is who they are." In public. Openly. The old houses had not believed in ambiguity. Harry was finding that he agreed with the old houses on this particular point. Ragnarok met them in the lobby, which Harry suspected was not how Ragnar typically spent his afternoons, which meant the senior accounts manager had been expecting him to come back. A goblin who expects you to come back has thought about what you'll come back to discuss. Harry appreciated this. Lord Longbottom, Ragnar said, with a nod to Neville that carried real weight. The Longbottom family was itself an ancient house, and Ragnar's acknowledgement was one professional greeting another. Neville straightened very slightly, the way people do when they're addressed correctly for the first time in a while. Ragnar, Neville said. He nodded back. They went to the same room as the morning meeting, with the same stone table, but this time there were 5 goblins present rather than 3, and the pensieve had been replaced with a large, flat surface of polished black stone in the center of the table, a mapping surface, Harry recognized, like the magical equivalent of a strategic planning board. Various properties glowed softly on it, scattered across a representation of magical Britain like hot coals. The properties, Harry said. Your properties, Ragnar confirmed. In their current state. The ones showing red are under Ministry administration. Green are dormant but accessible to you now. Gold are, a slight pause, contested. 4 properties were red. 3 were gold. 5 were green and 2 of those were so large they overlapped other markers on the map. Potter Manor, Harry said, pointing to the largest green marker, which sat in the West Country. He had never seen it. He had not known it existed until this morning. Fully accessible, Ragnar said. It was never formally transferred, the protective custody order covers the contents, not the building's magical deed. The manor itself recognized your blood claim the moment the loyalty blocks were removed. It has been, and here the goblin looked briefly at the map with what Harry would have described as cautious wonder, active since approximately 4 o'clock this morning. Active how? The wards reactivated. The house elves, which had been in a holding state, have resumed function. The manor's magical library, which is, I should note, the 3rd largest private magical library in Britain, has recatalogued itself and locked to your access only. Ragnar paused. Also several portraits that had been removed by ministry officials during the protective custody period have apparently returned. We are not entirely sure how. Neville made a sound that might have been a laugh. The black properties, Harry said. Grimmauld Place is the most complex. The Order of the Phoenix currently has use of it under an arrangement that the late Sirius Black made informally during his lifetime. That arrangement was never formalized in magical law. It exists on personal trust rather than contract. So it's mine. It is yours. The Order's use is, Ragnar chose the word with precision, a courtesy. You may extend or withdraw that courtesy at will. Harry thought of Grimmauld Place. The dark, peeling hallways. Mrs. Black's portrait screaming in the entrance. The kitchen where they'd all crowded around the table and felt like they were doing something, felt like they were fighting, while Dumbledore made every real decision in a room none of them were allowed into. He thought of Sirius pacing like a caged thing, wanting to fight and being told to stay inside for his own safety, and then dying because someone had wanted him in that house, wanted him contained, wanted the last free black neutralized in a place where his lord rights would never be exercised. He thought that Grimmauld Place needed gutting. The portrait of Mrs. Black needed taking off the wall and the whole house needed to become something different. That was for later. The Peveril estate, he said. Ragnar's expression shifted. Ah. This is where we encounter the first significant resistance. He gestured, and one of the other goblins produced a new stack of documents. The Ministry's reclassification of the Peveril assets as historical artifacts was filed under the Magical Heritage Preservation Act. Reversing it requires formal challenge through the Wisengamot's Heritage Committee. Which Dumbledore chairs, Neville said quietly. Both Harry and Ragnar looked at him. Neville shrugged, looking slightly self-conscious. Gran's on the Heritage Committee. I've heard her complain about the meetings. Until recently, yes, Ragnar said. Professor Dumbledore chairs the Heritage Committee. However, and the goblin's tone acquired a specific quality that Harry was beginning to recognize as the goblin equivalent of relish. The composition of the Heritage Committee is determined by the voting weight of the active houses represented on the Wizengamot. With the reactivation of 7 additional house seats, the committee's composition is subject to immediate review. He looked at Harry. You could, if you chose, call for that review before the start of the Hogwarts term. Harry looked at the map. At the gold markers, contested properties. At the red ones. At the vast green expanse of Potter Manor sitting in the West Country, freshly awake after 17 years of dormancy, portraits returning to their frames through means no one entirely understood. Tell me about the Ravenclaw claim, he said. The room was quiet for a moment. Ragnarok exchanged a look with one of the other goblins, a quick look, the kind shared between people who have already discussed something and are confirming that they've decided to address it. The Ravenclaw bloodline claim, Ragnarok said carefully, is the most, legally speaking, fragile of the 7. Not because it is weak, but because it runs through the maternal line and was reclassified 8 years ago in a manner that was technically legal under the existing statutes. He paused. Technically. But? Harry said. But the classification depends on a specific interpretation of the Muggle-born Magical Inheritance Act of 1910, which defines the inheritance rights of Muggle-born witches and wizards with respect to ancient house bloodlines. The interpretation used to reclassify your claim argues that Muggle-born inheritance is non-transmittable, that your mother's magical lineage, being Muggle-born, does not constitute a legitimate channel for house inheritance. That interpretation, Neville said slowly, would mean that any Muggle-born witch or wizard who discovered a bloodline connection to an ancient house, could not claim it. Yes, Ragnarok said. The interpretation, if upheld, creates a blanket exclusion. It is a very convenient interpretation for certain political positions. It's also, Harry said, not what the 1910 Act says. Ragnarok looked at him. No, the goblin said, after a moment. It is not. The 1910 Act is silent on transmissibility. The reclassification invented a restriction that the original legislation does not contain. He folded his hands on the table. Gringotts has a legal position on this. We drafted it in 1998, the year after the reclassification. We were waiting for someone with standing to bring the challenge. I have standing, Harry said. You have 7 times the standing, my lord. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the map. The blue marker for Ravenclaw, his mother's thread, the one someone had been frightened enough to block when he was 10, sat in the Scottish Highlands, a property that had been reclassified as a Ministry historical site and was currently, according to the documents, hosting a research team studying Ravenclaw-era magical architecture. Who authorized the research team? He asked. Ragnarok produced a document. Harry read the name at the bottom. It was the same name that had signed the Black family codicil. The same name that appeared on 3 of the 7 thefts. This person, Harry said. Not Dumbledore. Professor Dumbledore authorized and oversaw the majority of the operations, Ragnarok said carefully. But he did not sign every document. He appears to have used intermediaries for the operations requiring ministry access. This individual, a nod toward the document, has both Wizengamot access and ministry connections. They appear to have been the operational architect of the process, while Professor Dumbledore was the idea man, Harry said. A pause. That is one way to characterize it. Neville had been quiet through most of the detailed discussion, sitting with his elbows on the table, listening, and his face had been doing something progressively more visible as the meeting went on. Not anger, or not just anger. Something more personal than that. There were Longbottom documents filed during the same period, Neville said. It wasn't quite a question. Ragnarok looked at him. That is a matter for a separate account review, Lord Longbottom. If you would like to request one, I would, Neville said. Quietly. Firmly. I'd like to request one now. The 2 of them sat in Gringotts for another 2 hours. Firethorn was sent for tea, which arrived in plain mugs that suggested the goblins had not been anticipating the social element of this meeting but had adapted rapidly. The Longbottom review took an hour and revealed that while Neville's accounts had not been targeted with anything like the systematic approach taken against Harry, there were 3 discrepancies, small enough to miss if you weren't looking, large enough to matter if you were. In the management of his trust during the period when his grandmother had been listed as his primary guardian and a ministry oversight official had been listed as secondary. Neville read the discrepancy documents with a stillness that Harry recognized. The stillness of someone putting something away for later, the way Harry had put away his grief about his parents. Not denying it. Just filing it. Right, Neville said, when he'd finished reading. What do I need to sign? By 6 in the evening they had between them initiated formal account reclamation proceedings for all 7 Potter houses, signed Gringotts' standard agreement giving the bank authority to pursue legal challenges on Harry's behalf, arranged for a full legal brief to be sent to the private solicitor listed in James Potter's estate plan, and, on Ragnar's quiet suggestion, filed a formal request with the Wisengamot's administrative office for an emergency review of the heritage committee's composition in light of the newly activated house seats. That last one, Ragnar had explained, would land on the administrative office's desk first thing in the morning, before anyone had a chance to intercept or redirect it. Unlike the communications of 8 years ago, this one was filed through Gringotts' official legal channel, which operated on a separate registry from Standard Owl Post and could not be rerouted. Harry had appreciated the specific satisfaction in Ragnar's voice when explaining that. They walked out of Gringotts into the early evening alley as the shops were beginning to close, and the air had that particular quality of summer evenings, warm and dusty and faintly golden, the kind of evening that should have felt ordinary and didn't. "Who's the 7th name?" Neville asked, as they walked. Harry glanced at him. "What? You read that list twice in the meeting. Your face didn't change for 6 of them, but it changed for the 7th. Who is it?" Harry was quiet for a moment, watching a pair of witches argue amicably about which way to the apparition point. "Percy Weasley," he said. Neville stopped walking. Harry kept going for 3 steps and then stopped too, because Neville deserved the pause. "Percy Weasley," Neville repeated. "Ron's brother. He was working in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement during the period when 3 of the reclassifications were filed. He had access to the relevant subcommittee records. His signature appears on 2 documents." Harry turned to face him. "I don't think he understood what he was doing. I think he was given pieces, told that these were routine administrative filings, routine protective measures for a minor's estate, and he signed them because he was ambitious and he trusted the people giving him the work and he wasn't asking the right questions." "That doesn't make it better," Neville said. "No. But it makes it different." Harry looked at the alley, at the long shadows of evening. "The difference matters. For what happens next." Neville turned this over. "You're going to have to tell Ron." "Yes." "When?" "When I know what I'm telling him." Harry started walking again. "When I know the full picture. Not before." The leaky cauldron was filling up for the evening when they got back. Tom had held Harry's room without being asked to, which was either genuine hospitality or the instincts of someone who had spent 40 years watching magical Britain's power structures and had a good sense of which way the wind was turning. Harry suspected the latter. Tom was not a stupid man. They ate dinner in Harry's room rather than the main bar, because Harry had spread the documents across the table and didn't want to pack them away yet, and they moved them to the bed and ate off the table, which was not elegant but was functional. Tom sent up shepherd's pie without being asked and Harry found himself eating properly for the first time in weeks, the Dursleys' begrudging meals replaced by actual food, and Hedwig came through the window at some point and stole a piece of toast with the casual assurance of someone who has decided they've been patient long enough. "What's the timing?" Neville asked, eating with his elbows on the table, his sleeves rolled up. "Hogwarts term starts in 4 weeks, Harry said. I want the Heritage Committee review done before then." I want the Potter Manor property cleared from Ministry administration before then. I want the Weisengemot emergency session scheduled. That's ambitious. The timing matters. Once term starts, I'm on Hogwarts grounds and Dumbledore controls the environment. Before term, I control the environment. He looked at his shepherd's pie. He hasn't responded to my letter yet. How did you send it? Through Gringotts registered channel. Neville understood the implication immediately. So he can't claim he didn't receive it. Right. He has the record of receipt. He knows I know. Which means whatever he does next is his first real move, and I want to see what it is before I go back to Hogwarts. Neville was quiet for a moment. He's going to come in person, he said. He won't write back. He'll want to see you face to face where he can use, he paused, looking for the word. His presence, Harry supplied. He's very good at it. The whole room shifts when Dumbledore walks in. You feel like anything he says must be reasonable because the man saying it is, himself. He looked at the Potter ring on his hand. I've noticed it for years. I just wasn't in a position to do anything about the noticing. Are you in a position now? Harry thought about 48 shattered loyalty blocks. About his mother's handwriting in the margin of his father's letter. About Ragnarok's expression when Harry had walked out of the morning meeting, and the specific quality of that professional respect, not deference, not performance, but the kind of acknowledgement you give someone who has demonstrated that they understand the stakes and are not afraid of them. Yes, he said simply. Hedwig, from the headboard of the other bed, clicked her beak once. It sounded like agreement. After Neville had gone, he was staying with his grandmother in London for supply shopping, and Augusta Longbottom was, by Neville's description, the kind of woman who noticed if you weren't home by 10. Harry sat alone with the documents and the quiet of the room and the city sounds filtering up from below. He read the letter from his parents again. Not the legal sections, not the strategic parts. The margin note. You don't have to earn what's already yours. He sat with that sentence, turned it over, looked at it from different angles. He thought about 6 years of being told, in various explicit and implicit ways, that his value was conditional. That his position among the people who cared about him depended on being the right kind of person, brave enough but not reckless, powerful but self-deprecating about it, special but not so special that it made anyone uncomfortable. He thought about how thoroughly he had internalized that conditioning. How good he had become at making himself smaller than he was, how automatic the process had become, so automatic he hadn't noticed it happening. 48 times, someone had reached into his magical core and put a clamp on it, and the clamps had become the baseline and he'd never known anything different. He looked at Hedwig. You should have been able to break them sooner. She tilted her head. Made the low, resonant sound that he was beginning to understand as her version of complex explanation. The birthday threshold, he said. You needed me close enough to majority before the blocks would release cleanly without taking something with them. She held his gaze. He took that for yes. Were you watching it? For 17 years. Were you just waiting for the window? She ruffled her feathers once, smoothed them, and looked at him with those amber eyes that had always been warmer than owl eyes had any right to be. And Harry thought about being 11 years old in a pet shop in Diagon Alley, and this owl, this ancient, impossible, loyal creature who had apparently been waiting for him across a bond older than anyone currently alive, choosing him off a shelf. Or seeming to. And really what had happened was that she had been there first, placed there, waiting for him to arrive. Knowing that he would. 7 years of letters. 7 years of being his one consistent thing, the one piece of the magical world that had always, without fail, come back to him. He'd thought it was what owls did. He thought it was training, and affection, and the particular stubbornness of a very good bird. It was that. And it was also a 7-generation bond. And it was also love, if love could exist in the form of something that had been watching over him since before he could speak, dismantling the harm done to him as carefully and completely as it could manage within the constraints it had been given. He held his arm out. She came to it. He sat there with her weight on his arm and the 7 rings warm on his fingers and his parents' letter in his chest pocket and the full, extraordinary sense of a world that was exactly as complicated as it had always been, but which he was, for the first time, actually equipped to navigate. His owl screamed into the dark and broke him free. Everything else was just what came next. In the morning, Dumbledore's response arrived. Not a letter. A presence. Harry felt it before he heard the knock, felt the specific quality of a magical signature he'd known for 6 years, now visible to him with his full perception in a way that was, in its own way, instructive. Old magic. Vast and deep and entirely accustomed to being the most significant thing in any room it entered. Harry got up. Put on the jacket with his parents' letter in the pocket. Let the ring sit on his fingers in the morning light, all 7, visible. Opened the door. Dumbledore stood in the corridor in traveling robes, and his blue eyes went immediately to Harry's hands, and then to Harry's face, and something moved through the old man's expression that was too fast and too controlled to name fully, but that Harry's full perception could catch the edges of. It wasn't surprise. It was something closer to the specific grief of someone who has built a very careful architecture and has heard the first crack appear in the foundation. Harry, Dumbledore said. His voice was warm. It was always warm. It was a voice that had spent 80 years learning how to be exactly what the person hearing it needed it to be. May I come in? Harry looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that it was its own kind of answer. Then he stepped back from the door. Sit down, Professor, he said. We should talk. Chapter 3, 36 Empty Seats. Dumbledore took the chair by the window. It was a deliberate choice. Harry watched him make it, watched the old man's eyes move across the room in that way he had, cataloguing, assessing, finding the position that gave him the best view of the space and the person in it. The chair by the window put Dumbledore with the morning light behind him, which would have backlit him nicely and made his expression harder to read. It was the kind of thing you did without thinking if you'd spent 80 years in rooms where managing perception was as important as anything you said. Harry took the chair across the table. Moved it slightly so the light came from his left rather than his face, which put both of them in roughly equivalent visibility. He watched Dumbledore notice this adjustment and not comment on it, and that non-comment told him something useful. The documents were still on the bed. Harry had not moved them. He watched Dumbledore's eyes travel to them and back to Harry's face, and the old man's expression stayed warm and open and gently sad in a way that was very well executed. I imagine, Dumbledore began, that you have had quite a significant night. And morning, Harry said. I've been busy. Yes. Dumbledore looked at the rings. Not with the quick professional assessment of Ragnarok, who had seen the rings as legal realities to be processed, but with something more complex, the look of someone seeing a thing they had planned around for a very long time finally stepping outside the plan. 7 houses. I had hoped, he paused. What had you hoped? Harry asked. His voice was conversational. Interested, even. Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes, and behind them Harry could see the machinery working, not maliciously, not theatrically, but with the genuine, grinding effort of an extraordinarily intelligent man recalculating in real time. I had hoped to be the one to tell you, Dumbledore said. In time. When I felt you were ready. When you felt I was ready, Harry repeated. Not when I was ready. When you felt I was. A small silence. You are angry, Dumbledore said. Gently. As though anger were a thing to be acknowledged and then set aside. I'm clear, Harry said. That's different. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, unhurried. He had all morning. He had the documents on the bed and Ragnarok's legal team already moving and the Heritage Committee review already filed. He had time. Dumbledore, he suspected, was the one without time to spare. I want to ask you something, and I'd like you to actually answer it rather than answering something adjacent to it that I didn't ask." The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. Something that might have been recognition. "I will try. Did you believe you were protecting me?" The old man was quiet for a moment that was genuine rather than performed. "Yes," he said. "I did. I do." He looked at his hands, folded in his lap, the familiar long fingers, the blackened one still carried as it had been since last year. "I want to be honest with you, Harry. I know that is somewhat ironic, given the circumstances. But I want to try. Then be honest." Dumbledore looked up. "I looked at you," he said, "when you were a child of 1 year old, and I saw the greatest concentration of magical potential I had encountered in 90 years. I saw 7 house claims converging on one bloodline, more political power than any single individual should hold, and I saw the war that had just ended and the certainty that it would begin again." He paused. "And I made a choice. I chose to simplify you. To make you accessible. To ensure that the people around you, the magical world around you, could approach you without the weight of 7 houses and 36 Wizengamot votes creating a distance that made genuine human connection impossible." Harry looked at him. "That's not what you did." "No," Dumbledore agreed, quietly. "That is what I told myself I was doing. What I actually did was ensure that you could not act independently of my guidance. I told myself the distinction didn't matter. I was wrong." The morning light moved on the wall between them. Below, Harry could hear the leaky cauldron coming to life, voices, the clink of cups, Tom's measured footsteps across the flagstones. "The Ravenclaw block," Harry said. "The one added when I was 10. After Hogwarts. After sorting." "Who panicked?" Dumbledore didn't look away. "I did," he said. "You had just been sorted into Gryffindor. The Gryffindor claim I could manage, I knew the house, I knew its history, I knew how to position you within it. But the Ravenclaw connection ran through your mother's line, and if it became known that Lily's bloodline carried an ancient house claim, questions would have been asked about the Muggle-born Inheritance Act interpretation that had been used to bury it. Those questions would have led to other questions." He was quiet a moment. "I acted quickly. I am not proud of it." "You acted quickly to protect the architecture," Harry said. "Not me." Dumbledore said nothing. Which was its own answer. Harry stood. He walked to the window and looked out at Diagon Alley, at the morning crowd, at witches and wizards going about their lives in a magical Britain that had been quietly, systematically arranged around the chess game being played at its top. "Here's what I want you to understand," he said, without turning around. "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm not going to Wizengamot sessions and filing Heritage Committee reviews because I'm angry and I want to hurt you. I'm doing it because these are my houses. They were always my houses. My parents built provisions for them, my bloodline carries them, and the magic recognizes me." He held up his hand, the 7 rings catching morning light, "whether or not you think I'm ready." He turned then. Dumbledore was watching him with an expression that Harry had never seen on the old man before, not the fond benevolence, not the careful warmth, not even the strategic sadness. Something older and quieter than any of those. Something that might, if you were being generous, be called witnessing. "The Wizengamot session," Harry said. "The Emergency Heritage Committee review. I've filed for it through Gringotts legal channel. You'll have received the official notification this morning." "I have," Dumbledore said. "I'm not asking you to step down from the Heritage Committee chair voluntarily. I'm telling you that when the committee's composition is reviewed based on active house seats, the review will show that the current composition doesn't reflect the voting weight correctly. The review will mandate changes. That's not personal. That's procedure." "I know the procedure," Dumbledore said, dry as old paper. "Then you know I don't need your permission." Harry moved away from the window, picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, shrugged it on. The rings caught the light. I also know that there are 6 other people on that list from Gringotts, and one of them isn't you. One of them did most of the operational work and used your name and your authority as cover, and I suspect they told you it was necessary and you let it be necessary because it was convenient. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. Who are you protecting there? Something shifted in Dumbledore's eyes. The first thing in this conversation that he hadn't already planned for. That, he said, after a moment, is more complicated. It always is with you, Harry said, without heat. I'll find out through the documents. I have the signature. It'll be faster if you tell me, but I don't need you to. Dumbledore looked at the documents on the bed. Then at Harry. Then he said, carefully, some of the people who assisted me believed they were helping you. As I did. Some of them had their own reasons. He paused. I would ask you, Harry, to consider. I'll consider everything, Harry said. I always do. What I won't do is let considering become a reason for inaction. He picked up his wand from the table, old habit, and the wand felt different in his hand now, the connection between them richer, more responsive, like a conversation that had finally moved past surface pleasantries, and put it in his pocket. I'll see you at Hogwarts, Professor. Dumbledore rose. He was still tall. Still imposing. Still the most immediately impressive person Harry had ever shared a room with, and that hadn't changed, and it didn't need to change. Harry didn't need Dumbledore to be small. He just needed to stop arranging himself around Dumbledore's largeness as though it were the only kind that existed. At the door, Dumbledore paused. For what it's worth, he said, and his voice was quieter than it had been, stripped of its usual performance, your mother would have done exactly this. Faster, possibly. Harry smiled. Yeah, he said. I know. Dumbledore left. Harry stood in the room for a moment, then looked at Hedwig. She was watching the door with amber eyes, feathers smooth and still. Right, he said. Next. The Wisengamot's administrative office occupied a floor of the Ministry of Magic that most people in magical Britain didn't know existed. Not secret, exactly, it was listed in the Ministry Directory, floor 7.5, accessible by a staircase that most people walked past because it looked like a maintenance corridor. Harry had never had cause to go there. He went now, with Neville beside him and a copy of his certified Gringotts documentation in a spelled briefcase that Ragnarok had sent over with Firethorn that morning, and the staircase did not look like a maintenance corridor when you approached it with 36 Wisengamot votes and documents to prove it. It looked like a staircase. The administrative witch behind the desk on floor 7.5 was named Marisol Diggs, according to the placard, and she had the look of someone who had been processing routine filings for 25 years without incident and was not entirely certain she was prepared for whatever was walking through her door. She was perhaps 50, with reading glasses on a chain and the particular competence of people who have been underestimated for so long they've made peace with it. Harry set the briefcase on her desk, opened it, and laid out the certified Gringotts documents in a precise order he'd organized that morning. I'm requesting the formal registration of 7 House seat activations and a review of Wisengamot representation under the Active Houses Charter, he said. I've also filed for an Emergency Heritage Committee composition review. Both through Gringotts' official channel, registered this morning. I wanted to come in person to ensure the filings were received and to put the request on active status rather than standard processing. Marisol Diggs looked at the documents. She looked at Harry's rings. She looked at Neville, who gave her a politely neutral nod. She looked back at the documents and picked up the first one with the careful handling of someone who knows they're touching something significant. Lord Potter, she said. Yes, Harry said, which was still slightly new and kept being slightly new in a way he suspected would pass in time. 7 houses, she said. Not incredulously. Just, confirming. 7. She set the document down. Picked up her quill. and began processing the filing with the focused efficiency of a woman who has spent 25 years doing a job correctly and is not about to stop now regardless of how unexpected the content. Harry watched her and felt, unexpectedly, a surge of something like gratitude. Not everyone in the system had done wrong. Some people had just been doing their jobs in the parts of the system that functioned correctly, and those people deserved to be worked with rather than around. The Heritage Committee review, Marisol said, not looking up from the filing, will need to be scheduled through the committee chair's office for a date and time. The committee chair's office, Harry said, will receive official notification through the Wisengamot's formal channel, not through my office and not through a personal request. The review is mandatory under the Active Houses Charter once a representation discrepancy has been documented. It doesn't require the chair's agreement. Marisol looked up. She had the expression of someone who has just remembered a regulation that is technically correct and that she has, perhaps, spent some years hoping no one would invoke. Yes, that is accurate, she said. The mandatory review clause. I'll need to confirm the precedent. The last invocation was 1823, Neville said. Both Harry and Marisol looked at him. He looked mildly surprised at himself. Gran talks about the history. The Longbottom House seat was in dispute and the mandatory review clause was used. It's in the Wisengamot Charter, Section 14, Subsection 3. Marisol was already pulling a thick binder from her shelf. She found the section, read it, looked at Neville with an expression of professional appreciation, and made a note. I'll initiate the mandatory review process, she said. The chair will be notified through official channels as per the charter. The review will be scheduled within 10 working days. I'd like it expedited if the charter allows, Harry said. The charter allows expedited scheduling with cause, Marisol said, reading as she spoke. Significant representation discrepancy constitutes cause. She looked up. A discrepancy of 36 seats would constitute cause. Then I'd like to invoke that. She made another note. Her quill moved with the speed of someone who has found their groove and is not wasting it. Harry watched her and thought that Marisol Diggs was one of the most useful people he'd encountered in the last 24 hours, and that was saying something given that the last 24 hours had included Ragnarok. They left the administrative office an hour later with officially stamped copies of every filing and the Heritage Committee review scheduled for 8 days hence. The expedited scheduling had, per the charter, required Marisol to notify the committee chair through 3 separate official channels simultaneously, which meant Dumbledore would have received notification before Harry and Neville had reached the bottom of the staircase. He'll convene the order, Neville said, as they emerged into the atrium. Probably, Harry said. Let him. The order's loyalty to me hasn't been formally tested yet. Some of those people will choose Dumbledore. Some of them will choose what's right. I'm not going to hurry that process. Neville was quiet for a moment. Hermione's going to be furious. Harry thought about Hermione. About the specific quality of her relationship with authority, not blind obedience, she was too clever for that, but a fundamental belief in institutional legitimacy. A belief that rules existed for good reasons and that working within them was always preferable to working around them. It was one of the things he admired most about her, most of the time. It was also the thing that, he suspected, was going to make the next conversation with her the hardest of all the hard conversations coming. Hermione's going to be scared, he said. That's different from furious. When she's scared she goes furious, but underneath it's fear. She's going to be afraid that this breaks something. That taking what's mine through legal and political channels rather than through Dumbledore's approved method somehow, destabilizes things. Does it? Harry considered the atrium around them, the gold fountain, the queues of ministry workers, the bureaucratic hum of the place. It destabilizes the arrangement that certain people built to suit themselves, he said. I'm fine with that. They operate to Hogsmeade. Harry had not planned this part specifically. But he'd been thinking, since the morning meeting with Dumbledore, about the Hogwarts end of things. About the fact that Hogwarts itself, the castle, the magic in its stones, the ancient consciousness that he had always half-sensed humming under the surface of the place, was going to have an opinion about all of this. Hogwarts was a house, in its own way. Not in the legal sense, not one of the seven, but in the sense that mattered magically, a place with memory, with accumulated intention, with walls that had been laid by founders whose bloodlines were all, in various ways, part of what Harry was carrying in 7 rings on his fingers. Hogsmeade was quiet in the summer. The village had the pleasant vacancy of places designed for crowds when the crowds weren't there, wide streets, shuttered windows, the 3 broomsticks open but unhurried. They walked through it and up the road toward Hogwarts, and the castle came into view as it always did, vast and grey and immediate against the sky, and Harry felt it before he'd consciously expected to, the castle's attention. The shift in the ambient magic, the specific quality of awareness that Hogwarts seemed to have when something significant was approaching. He felt it recognize him. Not the way it had recognized him before, the generic awareness of a student returning. This was specific. This was the castle reading the 7 rings, reading the unlocked magical signature, reading the full breadth of what he was carrying, and responding. The wards along the road, usually inert to students outside term, requiring a staff member's presence to open properly, simply parted. Gracefully. Like curtains being drawn aside. Neville stopped walking. Did the wards just, yes, Harry said. For you. For what I'm carrying. Harry looked at the open ward line. Gryffindor's blood, he said. Slytherin's magical claim. Ravenclaw's lineage. Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw. 3 of the 4 founders. The castle knows. Neville was looking at him with an expression that had moved past surprise and into something more like awe, which Harry found mildly uncomfortable, not because he didn't understand it, but because he didn't want Neville to be awed by him. He wanted Neville to walk with him. Come on, he said. You coming? Neville came. They walked through the open wards and up the road, and the castle grew around them the way it always did, the way Hogwarts had always had this quality of becoming more present the closer you came, as though the building was leaning toward you slightly. The main doors were closed, which was correct. It was summer, there was no term, there should have been no access. Harry stood in front of the doors and placed his right hand flat against the ancient wood, the rings touching the surface, and felt the pulse of the castle's magic running up through his palm like a heartbeat. The doors opened. Inside, Hogwarts was the particular version of itself that only existed in summer, enormous and still and full of its own quiet, the staircases moving slowly through empty air, the portraits half asleep in their frames, the light coming through the high windows in long, angled columns that moved as the clouds outside moved. It smelled of old stone and wood polish and the lingering trace of 1,000 years of magic, and Harry stood in the entrance hall and felt, for the first time in 6 years, like the castle was responding to him rather than simply containing him. Where are we going? Neville asked, his voice automatically lower in the emptiness. The chamber, Harry said. Neville stopped. The Chamber of Secrets. It's not just a chamber, Harry said. It's the Slytherin house seat's physical anchor in this building. The magical claim runs through it. And I've never, he paused, sorting through the newly available knowledge. I've been in it twice. Once at 12, once at 17. Neither time as its lord. I want to go as its lord. Neville was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said, and fell into step beside Harry with the easy willingness of someone who has decided that wherever Harry is going is where the important things are. They went down through the castle, through corridors that opened for them in ways that Harry noticed and Neville was beginning to stop being surprised by, down to the 2nd floor, to the bathroom that was always out of order, where Moaning Myrtle looked up from her usual territory with large, watery eyes that went wide at the sight of Harry's rings. Oh, she said. Oh, it's you. But different. Different how? Harry asked, genuinely curious. Myrtle considered him with a focus she rarely brought to anything. Bigger, she said. You're the same size but you're bigger. She looked at the rings with the specific interest of someone who had spent 40-some years haunting an important magical location and had developed a sensitivity to magical significance that the living tended to underestimate. Those are very old, she said. Yes, Harry said. Myrtle, the sink. She drifted back obediently. Harry crouched at the sink with the serpent taps, and spoke. Not the hiss he'd always used before, the pressured, instinctive parcel-tongue of someone working the magic from a limited access point. This was different. This was the language settling into his throat from a deeper place, from the Slytherin claim and the gaunt blood and the strange transfer of a killing curse turned inside out, and it felt like speaking in a language you'd always known was there but had only ever heard through walls. The sink opened. The passage yawned. Harry went first, and Neville followed without hesitation, and the passage responded to Harry's presence in a way it had not before, the narrow stone corridor widening slightly, the darkness less absolute, a faint luminescence in the walls that was the castle recognizing who was walking through its deep foundations. At the bottom, the chamber opened around them. The long hall of pillars, the carved serpents, the faint green light that filtered from somewhere sourceless and cold. The skeleton of the basilisk still lay where Harry had left it 5 years ago, enormous and bleached by time, its empty skull turned toward the statue of Salazar Slytherin at the chamber's far end. Harry walked its length slowly. He could feel the chamber feeling him back. The magic in the walls was old, older than Hogwarts itself, or the same age as the oldest parts of it, and it was not asleep. It had been waiting. Not for someone to claim it in a territorial sense, not for a master or an inheritor in the simple property sense. For someone whose magic could speak to it in its own register, the register of a bloodline that ran deep enough and wide enough to be recognized. He stopped in front of Slytherin's statue. The stone face looked at him, severe and ageless, and Harry looked back without any of the awe he'd felt the first time he'd stood here at 12, facing a basilisk and a ghost of Voldemort's memory with a broken wand and a sword he'd pulled from a hat. Right, he said, to the statue, to the chamber, to the magic in the walls. I know what you are. I know what I am. We understand each other. The chamber responded. Not with sound, with shift. A quality of settling, like a very old building choosing to stop creaking. Harry felt it in the rings, in the magical current that ran between the Slytherin and Gaunt rings especially, a confirming pulse. He turned back to Neville, who was standing very still a few paces behind him with a complicated expression. You all right? Harry asked. I'm standing in the Chamber of Secrets, Neville said. With Harry Potter. While the walls are doing whatever it is they're doing. A pause. Yeah. I'm all right. It's a lot. Harry almost smiled. Yeah. Can I ask something? Neville said. Go ahead. What does it feel like? All of it. He gestured, encompassing the chamber, the rings, the whole of the last 24 hours. Not strategically. What does it feel like? Harry thought about it honestly. Like I've been breathing through a straw my whole life, he said, and someone finally handed me the actual atmosphere. He looked at the basilisk skeleton, the enormous remnant of the thing he'd killed with a sword through the roof of his mouth at 12 years old, while bound by loyalty blocks and operating at a fraction of his actual capacity. I keep thinking about things I've done and realizing I did them half-powered, he said. It's strange. It doesn't make me feel impressive. It makes me wonder what was actually possible. Neville was quiet for a moment. What do you think is possible now? Harry thought about the wards opening for him. The chamber settling. The castle leaning toward him. I think, he said carefully, that I'm going to find out. They left the chamber, and as they emerged back into the bathroom, Moaning Myrtle gave Harry a long look and said, with unexpected sincerity, "You seem better." Harry told her she was right, and he meant it. The walk back up through the castle took them past the Great Hall, and Harry paused at its doors and opened them, not with the expectation of anything, just to look. The hall was vast and tableless, the house tables stored for summer, the enchanted ceiling showing a clear July afternoon. He stood in the doorway and felt the hall's specific magic, the magic of a space designed to hold the entire student body of Hogwarts, and felt the subtle but unmistakable response of the hall to his presence, the slight brightening of the ceiling's representation of the sky, the warmth of the ambient magic, the feeling of a large space making room for what was walking into it. Neville was watching him. "The hat knew, didn't it?" he said. "The sorting hat. When it sorted you. It was going to put you in Slytherin." "It wanted to," Harry said. "I asked it not to. But it knew about the Slytherin claim." "The hat knows bloodlines," Harry said. "It knows everything about the founders. It has to, it was made by all four of them." He stepped into the hall, let the space settle around him. "When I sat under it at 11, it must have read everything, all 7 claims, all the bloodlines. And then it hit the loyalty blocks and couldn't understand why the person it was seeing and the magical signature it was reading didn't match. That must have been genuinely confusing for a hat," Neville said. Harry laughed. It echoed in the empty hall, clear and honest, and the enchanted ceiling shifted almost imperceptibly toward the warmer end of its afternoon palette. They spent another hour in the castle. Harry walked through the library, which was open in summer in the specific sense that the books were there and the wards would let him in, and no one was there to ask him to keep his voice down, and looked at the restricted section with the knowledge that the Potter family library, currently inaccessible in Ministry protective custody, was apparently 3 times the size of this one. He looked at the astronomy tower, and the transfiguration classroom, and the corridor on the 7th floor where the room of requirement sat behind its unmarked stretch of wall. He placed his hand on the wall, thought about what he needed, and felt the room respond, felt it with genuine surprise, because the room's magic was warm and immediate and entirely cooperative in a way that told him, when he thought about it, that the room had always been more cooperative with him than he'd had context to notice. The door appeared. He looked inside. The room had given him a study, large, comfortable, lined with shelves, with a desk and good light and, in the corner, a perch. He closed the door. Didn't go in. Just noted it, and moved on. On the walk back down to Hogsmeade, Neville said, "The Order meeting is probably happening right now." "I know. Dumbledore will be framing this carefully. He'll call it, I don't know. A crisis of trust. A misunderstanding. He'll call it a young man in grief making rash decisions," Harry said. "He'll be kind about it. He'll say he understands why I feel this way. He'll say he's worried about me." He said this without bitterness, just recognition. And most of the Order will want to believe him because believing him is easier than the alternative. Which is that the man they've followed for 30 years has been operating without accountability for so long he doesn't know how to want it. Neville chewed on that. "Moody won't buy it," he said, after a moment. "Mad-Eye. He's too paranoid to believe anyone completely." "Moody retired from the Order after last year," Harry said. "He's not in those meetings anymore." He'd gotten that from the documents, a letter from Moody to Dumbledore, cited in a legal filing, in which Moody had formally declined to continue active Order membership while citing what he'd called, in his characteristically blunt way, a systemic failure of operational transparency that I am too old and too honest to pretend I don't notice. Neville was quiet for a moment. "Who does that leave, on our side?" Harry thought about it. The list was shorter than he'd like and more surprising than he'd expected. Moody, retired but with his eyes open. Tonks, who had her own complicated history with the Black family politics and would want to see the documents before she chose. Kingsley, who was a professional and would respect legal standing. Fleur Delacour, who had no particular love for Dumbledore and significant practical interest in house politics given her own French noble family connections. And, unexpectedly, Narcissa Malfoy, who was not Order but whose particular position in the chess game had become something Harry had been thinking about since the documents named her as one of the people who had tried, in 2001, to formally challenge the Black family codicil and been legally blocked. She had tried to challenge it 3 years ago. On Harry's behalf, whether she'd framed it that way or not. He needed to have that conversation. Enough, Harry said, to Neville's question about who was on their side. We don't need the Order. The Order is Dumbledore's structure. We need the Wizengamot, and the law, and the 7 houses that already recognize me. He paused at the edge of Hogsmeade, looking back at the castle. Hogwarts sat on the hill above the village, grey and enormous and entirely unhurried, the way genuinely old things tend to be. And we need the hearing, he said. 8 days. 8 days, Neville confirmed. Harry turned away from the castle. Turned toward the road, and the next thing, and the long clear purpose that had not dimmed at all since 3 in the morning when everything changed. He operated back to London. Hedwig was waiting at the window of his room at the Leaky Cauldron, and when he came through the door she lifted her wings once in greeting and he felt the bond between them as a warm, steady thing, like a hand on the back of his neck. Not pressure. Just presence. On the table there were 3 letters. Tom had sorted the post while he was out. 2 were official, one from Ragnarok, one from the solicitor, both marked for urgent response. He set those aside to read properly. The 3rd was from Hermione Granger, and it was 4 feet long. He poured himself a glass of water. Sat down. Unrolled the letter. It began, Harry, I've heard from Ron who heard from Ginny who heard from your ministry filing notification and I need you to explain exactly what you're doing because from where I'm standing this looks like, it was, as expected, for feet of fear dressed as argument. She was brilliant and she was scared and she had already begun listing, in her characteristic way, every possible negative outcome of his current course of action. He read all 4 feet of it. He read it twice. He heard her voice in it, the genuine care underneath the controlled panic, the way she marshaled evidence when she was frightened, the fundamental Hermione-ness of responding to uncertainty with a research project. He picked up his quill and wrote back. Not 4 feet. 8 words. Come to the Leaky Cauldron tomorrow morning. Bring Ron. He sealed it and gave it to Hedwig, who took it with the calm of someone who knows the territory. He watched her disappear through the window into the London evening and thought about the conversation that was coming, Ron's face when he heard about Percy, Hermione's face when Harry laid out the documents and she understood the full scope of what had been done and had to decide whether her faith in institutional process could survive contact with the evidence of what institutions had processed. He thought about Dumbledore, sitting somewhere tonight, recalibrating. He thought about Narcissa Malfoy. About Ragnarok's legal team working through the night. About Marisol Diggs, whose processing efficiency had put 36 empty seats on the active registry before lunch. He thought about a castle that had opened its wards for him. About a chamber that had settled like a building finally set on its right foundation. He looked at the 7 rings in the lamplight of his small room above a pub in the middle of London and understood, completely and without drama, that the empty seats were never going to be empty again. 8 days. He was ready. Chapter 4, The Houses That Remember Potter Manor announced itself before you could see it. There was a quality in the air a quarter-mile out, a pressure, warm and specific, like the moment before recognition, like the feeling of a word on the tip of your tongue finally arriving. Harry felt it when he and Neville and Luna Lovegood crested the last rise of the Wiltshire Road and the valley opened below them, and the manor sat in it like something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for the right person to look directly at it. Luna had arrived at the Leaky Cauldron that morning at 7, an hour before Hermione and Ron were due, carrying a small bag and a copy of the Quibbler and wearing an expression of complete equanimity that Harry had learned to understand as her version of excitement. She had said, walking in, "The houses will want to meet you properly. You should do it soon, before the Wizengamot hearing. They need to know you're real." Harry had looked at her for a moment. "How did you know about the hearing?" "Dad got the notification through his press contacts yesterday evening. 7 active houses rematerializing in one night is rather significant news, Harry." She'd sat down and poured herself tea. "I thought you might want company for the visits. Property has memory. You shouldn't go alone." He hadn't argued. Luna had a relationship with magical reality that operated on a frequency most people didn't tune to, and she was right more often than the people who dismissed her would ever admit. So now there were 3 of them on the rise above Wiltshire, looking at Potter Manor, and even Neville, who had spent the last 2 days absorbing extraordinary things with admirable steadiness, had gone quiet. The manor was not enormous in the way Malfoy Manor was enormous, which was the size of institutional arrogance, built to communicate power to everyone looking at it. Potter Manor was large in the way that houses get large when generations of people who actually live in them keep adding the things they need: a wing here, a tower there, a conservatory that someone must have wanted very badly because it was attached at an improbable angle and worked anyway. It was stone and timber and old glass, and it sat in its valley with the particular assurance of something that has been in one place long enough that the landscape has grown fond of it. The wards along the road were active. Harry could see them the way he hadn't been able to see wards 2 days ago, his full magical perception reading them as layered structures of color and intent, gold and deep red, old magic that had been dormant and was now very much awake. They parted for him as he walked down the road, the way wards do when they know exactly who they're parting for. "It came back online at 4 in the morning, Neville said, watching the wards. "You said the house elves reactivated." "Are they? I don't know what state they're in," Harry said. "The documents said holding state. I don't know what that means practically." He paused at the manor's front gate, iron and old stone, with the Potter crest worked into the ironwork so old it had softened at the edges, and placed his hand on it. The gate opened with the ease of something that has been waiting. The grounds were overgrown in a way that was more alive than neglected, the lawns long and wildly green, the flower beds having spent 17 years deciding for themselves what they wanted to grow, a magnificent disregard for formal gardening that had produced something that was genuinely beautiful in a tangled, determined way. A large oak tree stood near the house, and Harry stopped under it for a moment, because there was something about it, the angle of a particular branch, the way it overhung the garden, that struck him as familiar in a way that couldn't be memory. He'd never been here. He had been here at age 1, briefly, and then the Fidelius charm had moved his parents to Godric's Hollow for the final terrible autumn. He had no conscious memory of this place. But the feeling under the oak was recognition, the body's memory rather than the mind's, the cellular knowledge of a place that was in some sense part of what he was made of. Luna touched the bark of the oak lightly with one finger. "This is very old," she said. "Older than the house. Your family built around it." She looked at Harry. "That says something about them." "What?" Harry asked. "That they knew what to keep." She smiled at him, simple and clear, and moved toward the house. The front door opened before Harry touched it. And in the doorway stood a house elf. She was old for a house elf in the way that suggests centuries rather than decades, with the particular dignity that very old magical creatures carry as naturally as breathing. Her eyes were the pale amber of old lantern glass, and she was dressed in what appeared to be a Potter family crest, not the sacking of an unbound elf but actual livery, pressed and deliberate, maintained through 17 years of dormancy with a care that spoke to an attention beyond ordinary service. She was very still for a moment, looking at Harry. Then she bowed. Deep and unhurried, the bow of someone performing an act of genuine significance rather than compulsion. "Young Lord Potter," she said, and her voice was the voice of someone who has been holding a sentence for 17 years and is finally allowed to say it. "Minky has been waiting." Harry crouched so his eyes were level with hers, which was instinctive and which he saw register in her expression. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Minky has been here always," she said. "All the Minkies before Minky were here always. We did not leave when they said the house was in custody. We stayed. We minded the house. We kept it." Her pale amber eyes held his. "That is what we do." "The portraits came back," Harry said. "Gringotts mentioned that. Minky called them back, the elf said, simply. When the house woke up. When the Lord's magic came back into the wards. The portraits wanted to come. They had been stored improperly. Something moved through her expression that, on a house elf, was the equivalent of profound professional disapproval. Ministry storage is not appropriate for family portraits. Harry stood. Can we come in? The house is Lord Potter's house, Minky said, stepping back. Lord Potter does not ask Minky if he can come in. I know, Harry said. I was asking you. She looked at him for another long moment. The pale amber eyes did something complicated. Yes, she said. Please come in. Minky will make tea. They went inside. The interior of Potter Manor was exactly what 17 years of dormancy with active house elf care looked like, which was, astonishingly, not much different from 17 years of regular habitation, except that there was a quality of stillness to it, the stillness of rooms that have been maintained but not lived in. The furniture was covered, some of it, but covered with precision rather than abandonment. The rugs had been rolled. The curtains drawn at the south-facing windows to protect the upholstery from sun. It was a house that had been put away carefully, like something someone intended to come back to. Harry walked through the entrance hall and into the main corridor and felt the house around him the way you feel a familiar room in the dark, not seeing it exactly, knowing it. The magic in the walls was old and warm and recognizing, the same quality as Hogwarts but domestic, personal, specifically tuned to the Potter bloodline in a way that made Hogwarts' response feel general by comparison. Hogwarts recognized the houses in him. This place recognized him. He stopped in the corridor outside what turned out to be the drawing room, because on the wall to his right was a portrait he recognized. His father. James Potter, painted perhaps at 25, in Quidditch robes that were somewhat rumpled and an expression of cheerful irreverence that Harry had only ever seen in photographs. The portrait was awake, had been awake since Minky called them back, presumably, and James Potter was sitting on the edge of his painted chair with his elbows on his knees, watching Harry approach with an expression that had gone very still and very present. Hey, James said. Harry stopped in front of the portrait. Hey, he said. The two of them looked at each other. Neville and Luna, with the sensitivity of good friends, had moved on into the drawing room with Minky and were making themselves busy examining the bookshelves. So, James said. You found it all. Hedwig found it, Harry said. I just had to wake up and process it. She waited a long time. James looked at Harry's hands, the 7 rings, and his expression was complicated in the way that portraits can be complicated, carrying the emotional register of the person they were painted from even when the person is 17 years gone. She's been here too, you know. Sometimes. The bond doesn't require physical proximity, but, she visits. I didn't know if that was strange to tell you. It's not strange, Harry said. And it wasn't. It was exactly the kind of thing Hedwig would do, maintaining connections across dimensions because the bond demanded nothing less. Dad, the letter. In the Gringotts envelope. I hoped they'd include it, James said. I told Ragnarok, the one before this Ragnarok, his predecessor, I told him it should go in the secondary disclosure. That if the blocks ever came down and you ever made it to Gringotts with full standing, there should be something from us that wasn't legal language. He paused. Your mum insisted on the margin note. I know. She said so. James smiled. It was Harry's own smile, the same shape, and seeing it from the outside for the first time was strange enough that Harry had to look at the portrait frame for a moment before he looked back at his father's face. What are you going to do? James asked. Heritage Committee review in 7 days. Then the full Wisengamot session. Gringotts is pursuing the account reclamations in parallel. Harry looked at his father steadily. I'm going to finish it. Dumbledore came here, you know, James said. After we died. Before the custody order was finalized. He came and he walked through this house and I watched him from this portrait and I'd been dead 3 weeks and I didn't understand what I was seeing. The portrait's expression was controlled but not controlled enough to hide what was underneath. He stood in this hall and he looked at everything and he said, to no one, just to the room, he said this is the safest course. And then he left, and 2 weeks later the protective custody order was filed. Harry was quiet. I can't be angry anymore, James said. I've been dead too long. But you can. He looked at his son. It's all right to be angry, Harry. Just don't be only that. I'm not, Harry said. I've got plenty else going on. James laughed. It was the laugh Harry had heard described, full and sudden and genuine, the laugh of someone who found life genuinely funny more often than not. Yeah, he said. 7 houses will keep you busy. He paused. There's a room on the 2nd floor. 3rd door on the left. Your mother's study. Her books are still there, Minky kept everything. She had research on the Ravenclaw connection. Her own research, from before you were born. She figured it out herself and was halfway through documenting it when, he stopped. Reset. The research is there. It'll help with the Wizengamot challenge. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me, James said, simply. Just go get what's yours. Harry went through the house. He spent 2 hours in it, moving from room to room, not cataloging but inhabiting, learning the place the way you learn a person, not by their list of features but by spending time with them. The library was everything Gringotts had described and more, walls of books floor to ceiling, magical indexes that activated when Harry entered and began cross-referencing against his known research interests in a way that suggested the library had a sophisticated intelligence of its own. He stood in the middle of it for 5 minutes just feeling the scale of it. His mother's study was the 3rd door on the left on the 2nd floor, as James had said, and it was smaller than Harry had expected, not a grand researcher's space but a working one, with the specific organization of someone who thinks fast and needs their materials accessible. Papers on the desk, weighted against disturbance by small enchanted stones. Quills in a cup. A window overlooking the oak tree. On the desk, in a folder labeled in Lily Potter's precise handwriting, was the research. 40 pages of notes on the Ravenclaw bloodline connection, tracing the lineage through 5 generations of Muggle-born and half-blood witches on her maternal side, back to a woman named Eleanor Ravenclaw Evans who had married in 1782 and whose descendants had passed through generations of Muggle intermarriage, gradually losing the magical expression of their heritage but not the bloodline claim itself. The notes were thorough and cross-referenced and beautiful in the way that genuinely good research is beautiful, clear thinking made visible on the page. At the back of the folder was a single additional sheet, separate from the research, in a slightly different hand, faster, like it had been written quickly. If anyone finds this who isn't Harry, put it down and get out of my study. If it's Harry, hello, sweetheart. The full lineage chart is in the locked drawer, bottom left. Parseltongue key, you'll know what that means when you need to. Harry crouched at the bottom left drawer. Said one word in Parseltongue, the language settling into him as naturally as English now. The drawer opened. The lineage chart inside was 3 feet by 2 feet, detailed and color-coded, and it was, without question, the most beautiful piece of academic work he had ever seen. His mother had been extraordinary. He rolled it carefully and put it with his copy of the Gringotts documents. Luna appeared in the doorway. Ready for the next one? She asked. He was. They visited 5 houses that day. Potter Manor first, then Black, Grimmauld Place, which Harry approached with Neville and Luna through the front door rather than any magical concealment, and which opened for him with the specific reluctant creaking of a house that had been unhappy for a long time and wasn't yet sure it was allowed to feel otherwise. Mrs. Black's portrait screamed on cue. Harry stood in front of it. Enough, he said. Not loudly. Not with particular heat. With the authority of the Lord of the Black House standing in the Black House's entrance, the black ring warm on his finger, and his full magical signature filling the space. The portrait stopped screaming. It had never stopped screaming for anyone. Harry had seen Sirius unable to stop it, had seen the entire order give up and simply close the curtains. The portrait looked at Harry now with narrow, calculating eyes, intelligent, he noticed, under all the performance, and something moved in it that was unexpected. "Black ring," the portrait said, her voice stripped of its shrieking quality, lower, more itself. "Potter Lord wearing black ring." Her expression was unreadable. "You're the boy." "I'm Harry Potter," he said. "Lord of the House of Black. This is my house." The portrait was very still. "My son gave it to you." "Yes. And that was before the gift, legally. Before the codicil that tried to take it back. It was already mine." Something shifted in the painted face, not softening exactly, but the specific recalibration of an extremely proud person encountering information that restructures their framework. Walburga Black had been many terrible things. She had been, according to the family history available to Harry through the unlocked knowledge, also someone who understood the weight of house legacy better than almost anyone of her generation. The ring on Harry's finger was the thing she understood best. "You'll manage it," she said. It was not a question. It was the statement of someone who has looked at a situation and reached a conclusion. "Yes," Harry said. The portrait closed its own curtains. Quietly. From the inside. Neville made a sound behind Harry that was specifically the sound of someone trying very hard not to comment. "Not a word," Harry said. "I said nothing," Neville said. They went through Grimmauld Place, which yielded to Harry's presence the way a house yields when it's been waiting for its correct owner, not grandly, not with flourish, but with the steady unfolding of a place that has been wound tight for too long and is finally allowed to release. There were memories in the walls here too, and Harry felt them in his peripheral awareness, not Sirius's grief and confinement, or not only that, but older things, the Black family at its full complicated history, the dark and the bright of it, generations of people who had believed in blood purity with a fervor that had produced real evil and who had also, in the contradictions that families inevitably contain, produced Sirius, and Regulus, and Andromeda, and the quiet courage of people choosing differently. He thought about what to do with this house. What Sirius would have wanted, past the freedom he'd never gotten. He thought about Andromeda Tonks, Sirius's cousin, who had left the Black family for love and been blasted off the tapestry and who was raising Teddy Lupin alone, and thought that perhaps a large house in London could be something other than the Order's grim headquarters. The Peveril property came next, or what was accessible of it, which was less than he'd like because the physical estate was still technically under Ministry administration as a heritage site. They went to the boundary of the Peveril lands, which sat in the Highlands of Scotland at the edge of Wintergrey Hills, and Harry stood at the boundary marker, a stone so old its original carvings had been smoothed almost to abstraction, and placed his hand on it. The boundary acknowledged him with a pulse so deep Harry felt it in his back teeth. "What can you feel?" Luna asked, watching him with her wide, silver eyes. "It's angry," Harry said. "Not at me. At the people who reclassified it. There's a residue. Magical property has memory. This property has a very specific memory of a ministry classification order being filed against its own will." He looked at Luna. "Can land have a will?" "Of course," she said, as though this were obvious, which to Luna it evidently was. "Very old magical land absolutely can. The Peveril lands were settled by magic that predates the Ministry by 1,000 years. The Ministry's claim over them is," she paused, considering, "like a child's drawing stuck over a painting. The drawing is there. The painting is more there." Harry pressed his palm harder against the boundary stone and said, in clear and deliberate tones that carried the weight of the Peveril ring and his own full magical signature, "I hear you. I'm coming. 8 days. The pulse came back. Steadier this time. Patient. He had told Land to wait 8 days and Land had understood. He filed that away in the rapidly expanding category of things about his own capacity that continued to surprise him. The Gryffindor property was in Wales, a small castle rather than a manor, perched on a cliff above the Severn estuary, so old that the stone had taken on the color and texture of the cliff itself. It was not a large castle. It was a very old one, and it sat on its cliff like an argument, compact and certain and with the absolute assurance of something that knows it doesn't need to be larger than it is. Harry stood at its gate as the afternoon light came sideways off the water and felt the Gryffindor ring respond to the castle with an almost musical resonance, a note that ran from the ring up through his hand and settled into his chest. "This is the original," Neville said quietly. "The actual original Gryffindor seat. Before it was a house at Hogwarts. Before any of it." "Yes," Harry said. "And you feel it?" "Like it's breathing," Harry said. The castle was not in Ministry custody. It had never been reclassified. The Gryffindor claim had been deemed dormant rather than contested, because finding a direct Gryffindor descendant had seemed implausible enough that no one had bothered to challenge it. The wards here were older than anything Harry had encountered, older than Hogwarts wards, older than the Peveril boundary, and they opened for him with a deliberateness that felt like ceremony. Like the castle choosing to acknowledge what was choosing it back. Inside was sparse and clean in the way that very old magical buildings maintain themselves, not house elves here, just the building's own accumulated enchantments, layers of self-maintenance magic so old they'd become simply part of the stone. The great hall was small by Hogwarts standards, with a fireplace at each end and a long table of dark oak that Harry would have sworn was the same wood as the Sorting Hat, though he couldn't have said why. On the wall of the great hall was a sword. Not the sword of Gryffindor, that was at Hogwarts, and Harry had earned it at 12 and returned it to the hat and thought about it periodically since. This was older. The same quality of make, the same signature craftsmanship, goblin-made, or at least made to goblin standards, which were the highest standards available in the smithing of magical metal, but older, and different in the particular way that a prototype differs from its refinements. It had been here, on this wall, for a very long time. Harry looked at it for a long moment and did not take it off the wall. Some things you leave where they are until you understand why they're there. Luna was looking at the sword too. "That was Godric's personal blade," she said. "Before he had the one he commissioned for the school. This is the one he actually used." She paused. "It knows you're here." Harry glanced at her. "The sword knows?" "Goblin-made metal has memory too," she said. "Ragnarok would tell you the same thing." He looked at the sword. The sword hung on the wall and was, in its inanimate way, present. He thought about Godric Gryffindor pulling a sword in real battles, real darkness, and then choosing to build a school and put that darkness aside in favor of teaching frightened children how to be brave. He thought about the specific courage of that choice, not the courage of fighting, which Gryffindor had clearly possessed in abundance, but the courage of stopping fighting and choosing building instead. He thought he was going to need both kinds. The Gaunt property was last because of distance, an unpleasant tumble-down cottage in Little Hangleton that was, by any aesthetic measure, the worst of the 7 properties. But Harry had not come to 7 properties in one day for the aesthetics, and when he stood in the lane outside the Gaunt cottage in the late afternoon light, the Gaunt ring on his finger was warm with the specific heat of old magic that had been misdirected and was returning to its source. The Gaunt family had been Slytherin's last direct descendants before Voldemort, the remnant of a noble line reduced to poverty and obsession by generations of inbreeding and the particular madness that comes from holding tightly to a heritage you've used up all your actual resources to protect. The cottage was a wreck. The garden was the kind of tangled that suggests not romantic wildness but genuine abandonment. A snake's skull hung over the door, which Harry thought probably said something about the last occupant's sense of interior design. But underneath all of that, underneath the wreck and the tragedy of the Gaunt family's ruin, the land itself had the same deep heartbeat he'd felt at the Peveril boundary. Old magic. Older than Voldemort, older than Marvolo Gaunt and his children and their terrible choices. The magic of Salazar Slytherin, who had been whatever he had been, brilliant and paranoid and eventually wrong in the way that very intelligent people can be catastrophically wrong, and who had nevertheless built something so durable it had outlasted everything the centuries had thrown at it. Harry stood at the gate and spoke to the land in Parseltongue. Not at length. Just, I'm here. I know what you are. I know what happened here. It ends with me. The land answered. Quietly, deeply, without drama. Neville had stayed back during the Parseltongue. Not from discomfort, Harry watched his face and didn't see discomfort, but from the instinct of someone giving another person a private moment. When Harry turned back from the gate, Neville just looked at him and gave a small nod. They didn't discuss it. Some things didn't need discussing. On the apparition back to London, Luna said, 6 today. You didn't visit Ravenclaw. The Ravenclaw property is the one I need the Wizengamot session to free, Harry said. I'll go when I can go as its lord. Not before. Luna considered this. That's right, she said. It should be done properly. She paused. She'd have appreciated that. Your mum. Harry looked at her. You say that like you knew her. I didn't. But I've met her through what you're doing today. Luna had this quality sometimes of saying things that should have been oblique and were actually precise. The research in the drawer. The margin note. The oak tree they built the house around. She looked at him with those silver eyes. She was someone who knew what to keep. Like your father. You got it from both of them. He didn't have an answer for that wasn't insufficient, so he said nothing, which Luna never required you to fill anyway. Back at the Leaky Cauldron, dinner was waiting. Minky had apparently sent food through a house elf network that Harry was only just understanding the breadth of, because there was Potter Manor food on the table of his Leaky Cauldron room, which was both logistically impressive and deeply touching in a way he didn't have the energy to be fully moved by right now. He ate gratefully, all three of them around the table, Hedwig on her perch, the document still spread across the bed. Neville said, around a mouthful of what appeared to be some kind of exceptional stew, you know what today was. What? Harry said. You went to 5 houses and every one of them knew you. The magic recognized you. Not as an heir. Not as a claimant. He pointed his spoon in a general gesture of emphasis. As the Lord. They treated you as the Lord before you'd done anything to prove yourself to them. That's how bloodline magic works, Harry said. No, Neville said. Bloodline magic recognizes your lineage. What happened today was the magic recognizing you. There's a difference. He set his spoon down. Gran would know what to call it. I'm not sure I do. But I know what I saw. Luna, who had been eating with her characteristic serene focus, said without looking up, it's called acknowledgement. The houses don't just recognize bloodline. They recognize the quality of the person carrying it. They've been waiting to see if the person who carried all 7 lines was someone worth waiting for. She looked up. You are. That's what today was. Harry looked at the Potter ring. At the Ravenclaw ring beside it, blue as deep water, waiting. Thought about his mother's study with its careful organization and its locked drawer with a Parseltongue key that she had specifically designed for him. Thought about a woman who had figured out her own ancient lineage through sheer intellectual effort and documented it so thoroughly that it would survive her and reach her son through a drawer that wouldn't open for anyone else. He picked up the Gringotts brief from the bed, Ragnarok's update on the legal proceedings, which had arrived while they were out. The account reclamations were progressing. 3 of the 7 were already through first-stage processing. The Potter Manor Protective Custody Order had been challenged through the Wizengamot's mandatory review of its original basis, and the challenge had been assigned a hearing date of, he checked, 4 days hence. Separate from and before the Heritage Committee hearing. Things were moving faster than he'd expected, which meant someone at the ministry was processing these correctly rather than routing them to be buried. Marisol Diggs, possibly. He made a note to send her a thank you letter. The last item in Ragnar's brief was a short paragraph at the bottom, marked with a different seal than the rest, Gringotts' formal witness seal, which meant the content was being stated on record. We wish to advise Lord Potter that as of this morning, Gringotts has received a formal inquiry from the office of the Chief Warlock requesting access to the account audit records compiled for the Potter Family Trust review. This request has been declined on the basis of client confidentiality. We further advise that a second inquiry was received from the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement requesting the same access on public interest grounds. This request has also been declined. The records remain sealed to Lord Potter's access only. We will notify immediately of any further such inquiries. Harry read that paragraph twice. Set the brief down. Dumbledore's trying to see what I have, he said. Not alarmed. Just noting. Neville looked up. Does it matter? What you have is on the official record anyway. The filings, the Wizengamot notifications, he wants to know how much I know, Harry said. Not the legal record. The pensive extracts. The names. He thought about it. He wants to know which of the 7 names I have access to, and how clearly. Can he block the hearing? Neville asked. The Heritage Committee review, no. Mandatory under Charter. The estate custody hearing, no, the challenge was filed correctly. Harry stood, moved to the window, looked out at the evening alley. What he can do is prepare the narrative. Control how this is framed publicly before the hearings happen. He turned. Where's the Daily Prophet on all of this? Neville and Luna exchanged a glance. There was a small piece on page 4 this morning, Luna said. Routine Wizengamot administrative news. 7 house activations listed as part of a standard registry update. No name attached. Page 4, Harry said. That won't last. Once the heritage hearing date is public, it goes front page, Neville finished. Right. Harry thought about this. About Rita Skeeter, about the Daily Prophet's editorial relationship with whoever paid for the most advertising space, about the history of the press and Harry Potter which had been, charitably, mixed. He thought about the Quibbler, which had published his interview in 5th year and reached a readership that the Prophet's establishment bias had systematically ignored. He thought about Luna's father. He looked at Luna. How quickly can your father run a full editorial? Something comprehensive. Not a scoop, not a headline, the whole story. Documents, lineage charts, the legal record. Luna looked interested in the specific way she looked interested when she was mentally drafting. He can turn it overnight if the material is good. She paused. Is the material good? Harry picked up his mother's research from the bedside table. The 40 pages, the lineage chart, the 3 feet of Lily Potter's elegant and comprehensive work. He set it on the table in front of Luna. He added the Gringotts certified documents, the relevant subset of them, the evidence of the thefts, without the personal letters, without the names that were still being processed through legal channels. Enough to tell the story. Enough to make the story undeniable. Luna looked at the material for a moment. Her expression was the most serious he'd seen it all day, which on Luna meant something. This is your mother's research, she said. Yes. It's personal. Yes, Harry said. It's also the cleanest proof of the Ravenclaw claim's legitimacy. It's documentation by the person who discovered the connection herself, through her own scholarship. It's her voice in it. He looked at Luna directly. I want her voice in it. I want people to know who she was, not just who I am. Luna looked at the papers for another moment. Then she began carefully, precisely, sorting them into an order that made editorial sense, and Harry watched and thought that there were few people he trusted with his mother's words, and Luna Lovegood was unquestionably one of them. Outside, the London evening was doing its summer thing, warm and liquid and full of the particular busy life of a city going about its business at dusk. Hedwig ruffled on her perch and looked out the window with the amber eyes that carried 17 years of watching and waiting behind them, and Harry sat at the table with Neville and Luna and felt the day settle. 6 houses. 1 waiting. 7 days. Tomorrow, Hermione and Ron. That conversation had been building since the morning letter. He'd had all day to walk through 5 ancestral properties and feel the ground solidify under him, and part of him was glad of that, because the Hermione and Ron conversation was going to require the kind of solidity that only comes from knowing exactly where you stand. He knew where he stood now. He had felt the houses recognize him, had stood in his mother's study and opened a drawer with a lock she'd made specifically for him, had watched Walburga Black's portrait close its own curtains. He was ready for Hermione's fear and Ron's shock and the complicated, necessary, human difficulty of that conversation. He was ready to lay out the documents and be clear and be honest and hold none of it back. He was ready for all of it. That was what today had been, not politics, not strategy, not the legal maneuvering that had consumed the last 2 days. Today had been the ground under the strategy. The reminder that these weren't abstract claims or political positions. They were places. Real places with old magic and old memory, with house elves who had stayed through 17 years of dormancy because staying was what you did when you loved something, with portraits of his father that laughed like Harry laughed, with drawers that his mother had locked just for him, against the day she hoped would come. The houses remembered him. They had always remembered him. They had been waiting, the way Hedwig had been waiting, with the patient love of very old things for something they know, eventually, will arrive. He was here now. He was not going anywhere. Chapter 5, Loyalties, Tested. Hermione arrived at 8:20, which was 20 minutes later than she'd said and therefore, for Hermione, essentially late, which told Harry before she'd opened her mouth that she'd been standing outside rehearsing. Ron was with her, half a step behind in the way he walked when he was bracing for something and didn't want to show it. He'd grown another inch over the summer, which Harry hadn't seen yet, and he had the specific expression of someone who has been told the broad strokes of a situation and is waiting to find out which strokes are the bad ones. Harry had cleared the documents off the bed and organized them on the table. Neville was in the chair by the window, present but quiet, giving the conversation whatever shape it needed. Luna had gone back to her father the previous night with the materials for the Quibbler editorial, which would run in 2 days. Hedwig was on her perch. Hermione came through the door and her eyes went immediately to the rings. Stopped there. Harry watched her process them, the quick, efficient intake of information, the slight parting of her lips, the way her eyes moved from ring to ring counting. 7, she said. Sit down, Hermione. 7 houses, Harry. I know. Sit down. She sat. Ron sat beside her, and his eyes had gone to Harry's face rather than the rings, which was its own kind of information. Ron was reading Harry rather than the situation, which was what Ron always did when he was genuinely worried. Tell me everything, Hermione said. From the beginning. Don't leave things out because you think I'll argue with them. I'm going to tell you everything, Harry said. Including the parts that are difficult. He looked at Ron. All the parts. Ron's expression shifted very slightly. Okay, he said. Harry talked for 40 minutes. He laid it out sequentially, the way he'd organized it in his own understanding, Hedwig, the loyalty blocks, Gringotts, the audit, the 7 houses and how each had been stolen and through what mechanism. He put the relevant documents on the table as he went. He did not editorialize. He did not perform emotion about it. He simply put the facts in the order they went and let the facts do what facts do when they're true and complete. Hermione asked questions throughout, sharp and precise, clarifying questions, not challenging ones, the questions of someone who is building a complete picture rather than looking for holes. She picked up documents and read them. Set them down. Asked about specific legal provisions. Harry answered everything. Ron was very quiet. He had picked up one document and was holding it without reading it, which meant he'd stopped processing through information and was processing through feeling, which Ron did privately and in his own time and didn't appreciate being rushed through. When Harry reached the part about the operational architect, the person whose signature appeared on 3 of the 7 thefts, who had used Dumbledore's authority as cover while providing the Ministry access that Dumbledore alone couldn't have supplied, he set the relevant document on the table and did not say the name first. He let them read it. Hermione read it. Her expression did something complex and controlled. She set the document down very carefully. Ron read it. His face went through 3 things in about 4 seconds, confusion, because the name didn't immediately compute, and then the computation completing, and then something that was not expressible as a single emotion but occupied the space where several emotions were fighting for precedence. Percy, Ron said. Yes. Ron put the document down on the table with the careful flatness of someone setting down something fragile. He didn't speak for a moment. The room was quiet enough that the sounds from downstairs, voices, the clink of cups, Tom's measured movements, came up clearly through the floor. He didn't know what he was doing, Harry said. I believe that. He was signing administrative filings that he was told were routine protective measures for a minor's estate. He had access because of his position. He was used because of that access. He paused. That doesn't make him blameless. He should have asked better questions. He was in a position that required better questions and he didn't ask them, and that matters. But his culpability is different from Dumbledore's. Different from the others on the list. Ron was looking at the table. Does he know, he said. That his signature's on it? I don't know what he knows. He needs to know. Ron's voice was controlled in the specific way that Ron's voice got controlled when he was angry at something and hadn't yet decided what to do with the anger. He needs to, someone needs to tell him what he signed. When the legal proceedings are public, he'll know, Harry said. The record is the record. That's not, Ron started. Stopped. Started again. That's not good enough, Harry. He's my brother. He needs to hear it before it's public, from someone who, he stopped again. From someone who isn't going to treat him like a criminal, Harry said. Ron looked up. Yeah. Harry thought about it. After the heritage hearing, he said. Before the Wisengamot session. You tell him. I'm not going to use Percy against the Weasley family, Ron. He's not the target. His signature is evidence of who used him, not evidence against him personally. Ron held his gaze for a moment, and whatever he found there, he gave a short nod and looked back at the table. Not resolved, not at peace with it, but anchored. Enough. Hermione had been quiet through the Percy section, which was notable. She was looking at the documents still spread on the table, but her focus had shifted from reading them to looking at them as objects, the weight of what they represented. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. Dumbledore genuinely believed he was protecting you, she said. Yes, Harry said. That doesn't make it acceptable. No. It doesn't. But you're not, she looked up. You're not going after him the way you'd go after Voldemort. You're using legal channels. You're working within the system. I'm using every legal mechanism available to me, Harry said. Because they're there, and they work, and I have standing to use them. But yes, I'm not trying to destroy Dumbledore. I'm trying to undo what was done to me. He looked at her steadily. Those are different things. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, the Heritage Committee review. The Wisengamot session. What happens if they don't go your way? They'll go my way, Harry said, without any particular heat. Just certainty. Hermione blinked. Harry, you can't just, Hermione. He said it gently, not dismissively. I have 36 Wisengamot votes, certified documents, Gringotts' full legal apparatus, my mother's original research on the Ravenclaw claim, and a mandatory review process that doesn't require anyone's permission to proceed. I have the law. The law is on my side. He paused. What I need from you isn't strategic worry. I have plenty of that myself. What I need from you is a choice. She looked at him. The Ravenclaw claim, Harry said. The one that rests partly on the argument that Muggle-born inheritance is non-transmittable. That interpretation, if it stands, creates a precedent that affects every Muggle-born witch or wizard with a bloodline connection to an ancient house. Not just me. Potentially dozens of people, in future generations, if the old houses keep producing Muggle-born descendants the way they have been. He watched her face as she followed the logic. My mother was Muggle-born. The argument that stripped her line from my inheritance is the same argument that would strip the inheritance of any witch or wizard like her. Hermione was very still. I need someone who can explain that publicly, Harry said. Not as my supporter. As someone who understands the law and the precedent and can communicate it clearly to people who aren't going to take my word for it because I'm the one with a stake in the outcome. He held her gaze. I need you to be yourself, Hermione. Not my friend. Yourself. The room was quiet. Hermione looked at the document about the Muggle-born Inheritance Act interpretation. She picked it up. She read it, not skimming, reading, the way she read things she was going to know thoroughly. She set it down. The 1910 Act is genuinely silent on transmissibility, she said. The restriction was invented. Yes. That's not a gray area. Her voice had changed, not warmer or colder, but clearer, the way her voice got when she had moved from emotional response to intellectual conviction and found that they were, in this case, the same thing. That's simply wrong. As a matter of law, it's wrong. Yes, Harry said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her quill from her bag. She had brought a bag, of course, because Hermione came to important conversations prepared, and pulled a fresh sheet of parchment from it and began writing. Not her thoughts, not her response to Harry, she had already begun drafting the legal argument. The Hermione method, when you know what's right, start working. Harry felt something in his chest loosen that he hadn't known was tight. Ron, who had been watching all of this, said, "So what do you need from me?" Harry looked at his oldest friend. Ron, who was loyal in the instinctive, cellular way, the way certain people are loyal not because they've reasoned their way to it but because it's simply what they are. Ron, who had also, without knowing it, been adjacent to his family's involvement in what had been done to Harry, and who was sitting with that in his own quiet way right now. Nothing you're not already giving me, Harry said. You being here. That's what I need. Ron nodded. Once. It was enough for both of them. The morning moved into afternoon. They worked through lunch. Tom sent food, which sat mostly untouched and was eventually eaten cold, and by early afternoon they had a comprehensive brief on the Muggle-born Inheritance Act challenge, drafted by Hermione with input from Harry on the bloodline evidence and cross-referencing from Neville on the Wisengamot procedural history. It was, Harry thought, probably the best piece of legal writing produced in the Leaky Cauldron's 300-year history. He sent it to Ragnarok by Hedwig. Ragnarok sent back a response in 40 minutes, "This is excellent. We are incorporating it into the formal challenge brief. Please extend our compliments to whoever drafted the act analysis." Hermione looked faintly pleased when Harry read this aloud, which on Hermione looked like a small contained smile that she immediately redirected toward her parchment. The afternoon brought the first piece of news from outside their immediate circle, a knock at the door at 3 o'clock that turned out to be a Gringotts official owl, which arrived with considerably more ceremony than Hedwig's casual window entrance, landing on the table amid the documents with the deliberate gravity of a creature that knows it is carrying important post. Harry opened it. It was from Ragnarok, a single paragraph. The Potter Manor protective custody hearing has concluded ahead of schedule. The ministry's legal team withdrew its objection to the custody challenge after the presiding magistrate indicated that the original protective custody order appeared to have been filed without proper documentation of the minor heir's interests. The manor and all contents are formally returned to Lord Potter's estate as of 2:15 p.m. today. Ministry officials will vacate the premises by end of business. Harry read it twice. The manor and all contents, which included 3 rooms of his parents' magical artifacts, his mother's full research library, and 17 years of accumulated history that had been sitting in ministry storage while someone filed paperwork saying Harry had consented to it. He set the letter down. "Good news?" Neville said, from his chair. "Potter Manor is formally mine," Harry said. "As of 2:15. There was a moment, and then Hermione said something that sounded a great deal like, "finally," under her breath while looking at her parchment, and Ron said, "brilliant," with the quiet genuine warmth that Harry had always relied on more than he'd known, and Neville just looked satisfied in the way that people look when something they've been quietly angry about is finally set right. They were still at work when the second owl arrived, not Gringotts, not official, a plain grey bird with a ministry seal that Harry's new awareness read as coming from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He opened it with the same steadiness he'd opened everything else in the last 3 days. It was from Kingsley Shacklebolt. Short, to the point, in the direct style Harry had always associated with Kingsley. "Harry. I've seen the filings. I've seen the documents through official channels. My position gives me access to the public record. I want to be useful. I know which ministry officials have been cooperative in routing your filings correctly and which have been attempting to redirect them. Let me know if that information would be helpful." K.S. Harry smiled. Wrote back, "Very helpful. Can you meet tomorrow?" The reply came back in 20 minutes, name the time. The news broke that evening. Not the Quibbler, that was 2 days out. The Daily Prophet, which had apparently gotten enough from the public Wisengamot filing record to put together a partial story, ran it on the front page of the evening edition. Potter claims 7 houses, boy who lived asserts ancient lordships in unprecedented filing. The article was 70% speculation and 30% accurate, which was actually a better ratio than Harry had come to expect from the Prophet, but the 30% that was accurate, the 7 houses named, the Heritage Committee review confirmed, the Ministry estate custody hearing result, was enough. Tom brought the paper up himself, with the expression of a man who has seen a lot of things in 40 years of running a pub that sits between the Muggle and magical worlds and has learned to recognize the ones that will matter. Harry read the article. Passed it to Hermione, who read it with a critical frown and circled 3 factual inaccuracies. Passed it to Ron, who read the headline and said, "Blimey," which was the appropriate response. Within an hour, the owls started arriving. Not official owls. Personal ones, from members of the Wisengamot whose seats were affiliated with the 7 houses through old alliance agreements, from witches and wizards Harry had never met whose names were in the Gringotts documents as parties to the alliance network, and from a number of people whose connection to Harry was more direct. Remus Lupin wrote with characteristic thoughtfulness, asking nothing and offering whatever help Harry needed. Tonks wrote in her energetic slanted handwriting, said she'd heard through Kingsley, said she had some thoughts about the Black estate that she'd like to share when Harry had a moment, and signed it with a small drawing of her own face in its current hair color. The Weasley owl arrived at 9 in the evening, and Ron saw it coming and went very still. The letter was from Arthur Weasley. Harry opened it and read it and handed it to Ron without comment. Arthur had written carefully. The handwriting was less steady than usual. He said he had seen the Prophet, and he had sat with Molly for an hour before writing, and what he wanted Harry to know was that whatever had happened, whatever was in the documents, the Weasley family's feeling for Harry was not and had never been conditional. He said Percy's involvement, if the reports were accurate, was something the family would address internally and with Percy directly and with full accountability, and that Harry should not feel that the actions of one person reflected on the whole. He said Molly sent her love and was, Arthur noted with what Harry could read as carefully modulated understatement, quite emotional. He closed by saying he was proud of Harry, in the way Arthur Weasley said things, not grandly, not with performance, just as a fact he felt should be stated. Ron read the letter twice. Folded it. Put it in his pocket. "Right," he said, to the window, in a voice that was perfectly controlled except that it wasn't. "Right." Hermione put her hand on his arm. Didn't say anything. This was, Harry thought, one of the better qualities of the two of them together. The last owl of the evening arrived at 9:30, and Harry almost didn't open it because by that point the table was covered in correspondence and he was working through the Wizengamot Alliance list with Neville and his eyes were tired. But the seal on this one was different. Not Ministry, not Gringotts, not any of the affiliated houses. It was the Malfoy seal, the snake and the crown, black wax, pressed with precision. He opened it. It was from Narcissa Malfoy, and it was not long, and it was not warm in any conventional sense. But it was direct in a way that Harry had not expected. "Lord Potter. You will have found, in the Gringotts documents, that I attempted a legal challenge to the Black Estate codicil in 2001 and was blocked. I did not do this out of personal interest in the Black Estate. I did it because the codicil was legally fraudulent and I knew it, and the Black name is my name by birth and I do not permit fraudulent documents to bear it. I have information relevant to your Wizengamot session that is not in the Gringotts record. I have held it for 4 years because I did not have the standing to use it. You do. If you wish to meet, I will come to wherever is convenient. I do not ask for anything in return except that when you sit in the Wizengamot, you remember that some people worked against the thefts from within the system, even when they couldn't win. N. Malfoy." Harry read it 3 times. He was aware of Neville watching him from across the table. "Narcissa Malfoy," Harry said, because the room deserved to know what it was dealing with. Neville's eyebrows moved. "Draco's mother." "Yes. She tried to challenge the Black Codicil in 2001, Harry said. "I found it in the documents. I'd been wondering why." He set the letter down. "She has information that isn't in the record. Do you trust her?" Neville asked. Harry thought about this honestly. "No," he said. "I trust that she has a genuine grievance about the Black name being used to file fraudulent documents. I trust that she's pragmatic enough that if she offers information, it's real information. She's not going to approach me now, at this stage, with something false." He looked at the letter. "Malfoys don't play losing hands." "That's not quite the same as trusting her," Hermione said, without looking up from her parchment. "No," Harry agreed. "It's enough." He wrote back, "Tomorrow afternoon. The Leaky Cauldron. 3 o'clock. He sent it, and thought about Draco Malfoy, whom he had not mentioned because Draco had not come up yet, and Harry was still working out what to do with Draco, who had done something genuinely surprising at the end of last term. Had done it quietly, had not made a production of it, which was not Draco's usual style and therefore meant more than if he had. He filed it for later. He went to sleep that night for the first time in several days without the documents spread across the bed. They were organized, filed, referenced, in the case Ragnarok had supplied. He slept 7 uninterrupted hours, which was the longest uninterrupted sleep he'd had since the end of 4th year, and woke up to Hedwig standing on his chest with the specific purposefulness of someone who has decided that 7 hours is sufficient and it is time to get up. Kingsley Shacklebolt arrived at 10 and took the chair across from Harry with the economy of movement of someone who has spent 20 years being efficient. He was in plain clothes rather than aura robes, which Harry took as a statement about the nature of this meeting. "The routing interference," Harry said, once they had tea in front of them. "Tell me." Kingsley told him. It was not a long story. 2 ministry officials, one in magical law enforcement, one in the Wizengamot's administrative support office, had been making minor adjustments to the processing queue for Harry's filings, moving them from priority to standard track, which added processing time and reduced the visibility of the filings to presiding officials who needed to see them. It was subtle, it was technically legal, and it was the kind of interference that would have significantly delayed Harry's proceedings if Marisol Diggs had not independently flagged the queue adjustments and overridden them. Marisol Diggs, Harry said. She works to the charter, Kingsley said. She's been in that office for 25 years because she's the most technically correct administrative which the Wisengamot has employed in living memory. She doesn't bend process for personalities. He paused. She's also the reason the mandatory review clause got invoked correctly. Most people in that office would have looked for a way to refer it upward. She just applied the charter. Harry thought about Marisol Diggs reading the text, finding the section, making the note. Doing her job with exactness in a system that had been designed, in certain places and by certain people, to make exactness inconvenient. I owe her a significant debt, Harry said. She'd tell you she was just doing her job, Kingsley said. That's what makes it a debt. Kingsley gave him a look that was the closest thing to approval Harry had ever seen on an Auror's face. The two officials doing the interference, he said. I have their names and the documented instances of queue adjustment. It's enough for a formal disciplinary proceeding. Hold it, Harry said. Don't file it yet. I want the information available at the Wisengamot session where it can be part of the full record. He looked at Kingsley. It demonstrates a pattern of active obstruction at ministry level. That's more useful in context than as an isolated disciplinary matter. Kingsley nodded slowly. You've thought about this carefully. I've had 3 days and a lot of documents, Harry said. What else? Kingsley leaned forward. The Heritage Committee meeting is in 6 days. The committee's current membership is 7 people. With the mandatory recomposition, the new membership distribution will give you 3 allied votes from houses that have formalized alliance through Gringotts. Dumbledore retains 2 votes through his personal relationships. 2 members are genuinely uncommitted. Who are the uncommitted 2? Wilhelmina Grubblyplank, she's independent, doesn't owe either side, cares primarily about procedural correctness. And Marcus Longbottom. Kingsley paused. Your great-uncle, Lord Longbottom. Harry looked at Neville. Neville looked slightly surprised and then rapidly unsurprised. Gran never mentioned he was on the committee, Neville said. She and Marcus don't get on, Kingsley said, neutrally. Neville made a face that suggested a long family history in 2 words, she knows. Harry thought about Marcus Longbottom, whom he had never met, who sat on a committee and voted independently and shared a family name with one of the steadiest people Harry had encountered in the past 3 days. Would he listen to Neville? Harry asked. Kingsley considered it. He might. He has a great deal of respect for the Longbottom name even if he and Augusta have their difficulties. Neville was quiet for a moment, with the stillness of someone making a decision. I'll go, he said. I'll talk to him. Are you sure? Harry said. He's family, Neville said. That's either the best argument or it's nothing. I'd rather find out which. Narcissa Malfoy arrived at 3 o'clock precisely. She was not in formal robes, which was either an attempt to appear less threatening or a genuine concession to the setting. Harry gave her the benefit of deciding it was both and neither, simultaneously, because Narcissa Malfoy gave the impression of someone who made no distinction between strategic and genuine. She sat down across from Harry with the ease of someone sitting in a room they have assessed and found satisfactory, and looked at him with cool blue eyes that were extraordinarily direct. Lord Potter, she said. Mrs. Malfoy, Harry said. Thank you for coming. She looked at the rings. Not the way most people had been looking at them, with surprise or calculation or deference. With the specific evaluation of someone who knows exactly what they're looking at. 7, she said. Sirius would have found that enormously satisfying. I think so too, Harry said. Something moved in her expression. Not quite warmth. Something adjacent to it, in the way that very controlled people sometimes let something real exist at the edge of their composure. He spoke of you, she said. More than he intended to, I think. He was not good at not caring. She straightened slightly, moving away from whatever that edge was. The information. Please, Harry said. The codicil to Sirius's will, she said. The one that attempted to override his bequest to you. It was filed by the executor using a provision of the Ancient Houses Act. She folded her hands on the table. The provision requires the executor to demonstrate that the named heir has been assessed by a Wisengamot-appointed guardian and found incapable of management. That assessment is a requirement, not an option. Harry was very still. There was no assessment, he said. There was no assessment, Narcissa confirmed. I looked for it in 2001 when I filed my challenge. The assessment is required to be on file with the Wisengamot's House Records Office before the provision can be invoked. It is not there. She paused. It was never there. The provision was invoked without the required assessment being completed. Which means the invocation was not merely fraudulent in intent, it was procedurally invalid from the moment it was filed. Harry thought about this. The codicil is void on its face, he said. Not just challengeable. Void. Void, she confirmed. Your Gringotts legal team will argue it and they will be correct. But they may not have found the specific absence in the records. It requires cross-referencing the Ancient Houses Act procedural requirements against the House Records Office filing log, which is a separate registry from the general Wisengamot records. She looked at him evenly. I did that work in 2001. I have the cross-reference documentation. She opened her bag and set a folder on the table. Harry looked at it. He looked at her. Why? He asked. Directly. Not suspiciously, just wanting the real answer. She was quiet for a moment. The black name is my name, she said, as she had written. Sirius was my cousin. We were not close. He found my choices unforgivable and I found his infuriating, and we spent most of our adult lives being angry at each other from a distance. Something in her voice was controlled in a way that had effort behind it. But he was the head of my house. And he chose you as his heir with full legal force and his entire will behind it. And someone filed a fraudulent document to override that choice. She met Harry's eyes. I don't permit that. Harry opened the folder. The documentation was exactly what she described, methodical, cross-referenced, dated 2001, with her signature and a Gringotts verification seal from the same year. She tried to use this, Narcissa said. In 2001. The challenge was blocked on the grounds that my standing to challenge the codicil was insufficient, that as a collateral black family member, not the named heir, I lacked the legal standing to dispute an executor's decision. But I have standing, Harry said. You have the standing of the named heir and the lord of the house, Narcissa said. You have every standing available. Harry looked at the documentation. Thought about Narcissa Malfoy in 2001, sitting with this cross-referenced proof, filing a challenge, being told she didn't have standing. Sitting with correct documentation and insufficient standing for 4 years while Harry grew up not knowing the Black estate existed. I'll use it at the heritage hearing, he said. And at the Wisengamot session. Good. She moved to stand. Mrs. Malfoy, Harry said. She stopped. Draco. At the end of last term. He paused, choosing the words. Thank you. For whatever you said to him that resulted in what he did. She looked at him for a long moment. Her expression did not change significantly, but her eyes were very direct. I told him, she said, carefully, that his father had made choices out of fear, and that if Draco wanted to be different from his father he would have to make choices out of something else. She paused. He is trying. I cannot speak to the results. He succeeded, Harry said. What he did mattered. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she nodded, once, and left. Harry sat with the folder from Narcissa Malfoy and the list of names on the table and the 7 rings warm on his fingers, and thought that the world was significantly more complicated than his 17-year-old self had understood it to be 3 days ago, and also that complicated was fine. Complicated was workable. What wasn't workable was simple and wrong, which was what the last 17 years had been. The door knocked again at 5 o'clock. Harry opened it and found Draco Malfoy in the corridor, looking like he had argued himself into coming and had narrowly won. Harry looked at him for a moment. Draco looked back with the expression of someone standing on uncertain ground and trying not to show that it's uncertain. "I heard my mother was here," Draco said. "I wasn't following her. I was in Diagon Alley it doesn't matter. Can I come in?" Harry stepped back from the door. Draco came in and took in the room, the documents, Neville by the window, Hermione at the table who looked up from her parchment and gave Draco a look that contained volumes of complicated history efficiently compressed. Ron, who had returned from an errand, went very still. "Weasley," Draco said, with the flatness of someone who has decided to simply acknowledge and move on. "Malfoy," Ron said, with the flatness of someone choosing the same. It was not warmth. It was functional. Harry filed it as progress. Draco looked at the rings. He had the same evaluating look Narcissa had had, which was clearly a family trait, and then he looked at Harry with an expression that was the most unguarded thing Harry had seen on his face in 7 years. "I want to help," he said. "I'm aware that's a strange sentence coming from me. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking for a task. Something specific. Give me something to do and let the doing speak for itself." Harry looked at him for a long moment. Draco held the look with difficulty but held it. "The Wizengamot session," Harry said. "I need someone to sit in the gallery who knows the procedures better than I do and can send me notes if I'm missing something. Someone who has watched those sessions their whole life." Draco blinked. "That's it?" "That's it for now," Harry said. "It's not nothing." Draco was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "I can do that." "I know," Harry said. The evening brought the Quibbler's pre-publication proof, which Luna sent by owl with a note. "Dad's very pleased with it. He says it's the most important thing we've published since the Rotfong conspiracy and he means that as a compliment." The proof was 14 pages, comprehensive, with Lily Potter's lineage chart reproduced in full and Hermione's legal analysis of the Muggle-born Inheritance Act interpretation given a full 2-page treatment. The cover read, "The Truth About the Stolen Houses, Lord Harry J. Potter and the 17-Year Theft of an Inheritance." It would go out in the morning. The day before the Heritage Committee hearing. Harry read the proof in one sitting, Hedwig on his shoulder, the room quiet around him. He read his mother's research reproduced on newsprint, her precise handwriting translated into type, her voice in it still clear and exact and brilliant. Read Hermione's legal analysis, which was correct and comprehensive and written with the controlled urgency of someone who has decided this is important enough to be done perfectly. He set the proof down. Outside the window, London was doing what London did at night, enormous and indifferent and full of life, Muggle and magical both, the two worlds doing their parallel business in the same city with only the thinnest of membranes between them. Harry looked at it and thought about his parents, who had loved each other across the Muggle-magical divide in a way that had apparently irritated certain people's notions of propriety, and had produced a son who carried 7 houses and a Parseltongue and his mother's green eyes and his father's laugh, and who had spent 17 years being told, in 48 different magical ways, to be smaller than he was. He was done being smaller. Tomorrow. The hearing. And everything after. He turned away from the window and looked at Hedwig, who was watching him with amber eyes that had been watching him since he was born, across a bond older than any of the people who had tried to manage him. "One more day," he said. She clicked her beak. Once. Warm and certain. He believed her. Chapter 6. Lord of what was stolen. The Wizengamot chamber was older than most of the people who used it understood. Harry felt it when he walked in, not the performative awe of someone entering a famous space, but the genuine recognition of old magic meeting old magic, his full perception reading the chamber the way it had learned to read everything in the past week. The walls carried centuries of accumulated magical intention, decisions made, power exercised, justice given and denied in roughly equal measure over 400 years of institutional existence. It was the kind of place that had a memory. Harry's magic talked to it the way his magic now talked to everything old enough to listen. He walked down the central aisle at 8:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before the session was scheduled to begin, because he had decided that he was not arriving after anyone else was seated. He was not arriving to find the room already arranged around someone else's gravity. He was arriving first, taking his seats, and letting the room arrange itself around the reality of what he was. 7 seats. 3 rows of the curved tiered benches, spread across several sections that corresponded to the 7 houses, the Potter seat and the Black seat adjacent, the Peverell seat in the oldest tier at the top, the Gryffindor and Slytherin seats on opposite sides of the chamber in the positions the founders had occupied for the 3 years they'd both participated in early Wizengamot proceedings before the school consumed them entirely. The Gaunt seat had been dormant so long its nameplate was in script so old that the administrative office had needed a specialist to verify the translation. The Ravenclaw seat was the one Harry had fought 4 days to reclaim, freed by the Heritage Committee hearing and the void codicil documentation and Hermione's Muggle-born Inheritance Act argument, which the committee had accepted in full over Dumbledore's measured and ultimately insufficient objection. Harry sat in the Potter seat first. It was closest to the floor of the chamber, practical for someone managing multiple votes through proxy assignments. He'd studied the procedure with Ragnarok's team until he understood it the way you understand something you're going to need to use under pressure. He settled into it and felt the seat's magic recognize him, a warm pulse through the old wood, and then he stood and moved to each of the other 6 in turn, touching each with his hand, the relevant ring warming as he did, each seat acknowledging him and adding its weight to his presence in the chamber. By the time he'd done all 7 and returned to the Potter seat, 4 other members of the Wizengamot had arrived and were watching him with varying degrees of composure. Neville came in at 8:50 and took a seat in the gallery directly behind Harry's section. He had simply voted, and then spoken briefly with Neville afterward in the corridor for about 4 minutes, and Neville had come back with an expression that said something had been said that mattered and that he was going to carry it carefully. Draco was in the upper gallery with a pad of parchment and a quick quotes quill set to notation mode rather than the prophet's self-aggrandizing version. He caught Harry's eye when Harry glanced up and gave a small precise nod that communicated, "I'm here, I'm watching, I've got you." Hermione and Ron were in the public gallery opposite. Hermione had a folder. Ron had nothing because Ron had understood from the beginning that his job today was simply to be there, visible, solid, a Weasley sitting in the Wizengamot gallery in support of Harry Potter, which was its own statement in the language of magical British politics. Luna was with her father in the press section. The Quibbler had been out for 2 days. It had done exactly what Harry had expected it to do, not the hysteria of the Daily Prophet's coverage, which had run 3 follow-up pieces of diminishing accuracy, but a sustained, documented, unreturnable story that put the evidence in front of everyone who read it and let the evidence do its work. Xenophilius Lovegood was, in his eccentric way, the most honest journalist in magical Britain, and this story had found the version of him that understood he was holding something important. The chamber filled. Slowly, and then all at once, the way important rooms fill when the event inside them has become the only thing anyone can talk about. Cornelius Fudge arrived at 8:58 and stopped when he saw Harry already seated, and the stop was brief but visible, a stumble in the performance of his usual entrance, the performance of a man who has been important for long enough that he's forgotten importance isn't structural. He recovered and went to his seat, but the stumble had been seen, and in a room like this, seen things have weight. Dumbledore arrived at 9 exactly. He came through the chamber's main entrance in deep purple robes, and the room responded to him the way it always responded to him, a quality of attention, the slight recalibration of everyone's awareness toward the arrival of the person who had, for 60 years, been the most significant presence in any room he entered. He walked to his seat with the unhurried certainty of someone who has been certain for a very long time. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back. The look lasted perhaps 3 seconds. It contained, on Dumbledore's side, something Harry could read now with his full perception, not the carefully composed warmth of their leaky cauldron conversation, but something older and more honest, the look of a man who has spent a week understanding that the architecture he built is being calmly, legally, irreversibly dismantled, and who has arrived at something approaching genuine reckoning with why that is. On Harry's side, the look contained exactly what it contained: clear, steady, unafraid acknowledgement of the man across the chamber, all of his complexity, all of his genuine brilliance, all of the ways he had been both extraordinary and catastrophically wrong. Then both of them looked away, because the session was beginning. The Chief Warlock's role for today's session had been reassigned, per procedure, to the deputy, a witch named Josephine Marchbanks, whom Harry had looked up and found to be the grandmother of Griselda Marchbanks, the Wizengamot elder. Josephine was 87, had the precision of someone who has spent most of her life reading difficult text, and had reportedly told the administrative office when informed of the session's subject matter that she had been waiting for this particular reckoning for considerably longer than was comfortable and intended to conduct it by the charter and nothing else. Harry appreciated her before she said a word. "This session of the Wizengamot is called to order," Josephine Marchbanks said, in a voice that carried without effort. "The matters before us are as follows. First, the formal recognition of 7 House seat activations and the corresponding redistribution of Wizengamot representation. Second, the review of historical administrative decisions affecting the estates and inheritances of the Potter family trust. Third, a motion regarding the interpretation of the Muggle-born Magical Inheritance Act of 1910, Section 4. The chair will take these in order. Lord Potter." Harry stood. The room went absolutely still. He had thought about this moment. He had thought about what to say, how to frame it, whether to make it about the law or the story or both. He had talked it through with Ragnarok and with Hermione and with Neville, and he had listened to all of their advice, and then, the previous evening, he had set all of it aside and decided to simply tell the truth clearly and let the truth carry itself. "Members of the Wizengamot," he said. His voice was steady, not loud, the voice of someone who has no need to perform conviction because the conviction is simply present. "I'm not going to tell you what happened to me as though you don't already know. The Quibbler published the full documented record 2 days ago. The Heritage Committee reviewed the evidence 4 days ago. The Potter Manor custody challenge was resolved 5 days ago. The record is the record." He looked across the chamber, at faces he knew and faces he didn't, at people who had already decided and people who were still weighing. "What I'm going to tell you is why it matters beyond me personally." He paused. "Not for drama. To ensure the next part was heard. My mother was Muggle-born," he said. "She discovered her own connection to the Ravenclaw bloodline through her own research, without institutional support, without any framework telling her it was possible, because the dominant interpretation of the law said it wasn't. She documented it with the thoroughness and precision that anyone who knew Lily Potter would expect, and she left that documentation for me because she understood that the argument she couldn't make in her lifetime, I might one day be able to make in mine." He looked at the chamber. "The interpretation that was used to strip that claim from my inheritance, the interpretation that Muggle-born inheritance is non-transmittable, is not in the Act. It was invented. Placed on top of silence in the law and treated as though the silence had spoken. That interpretation, if it stands, does not only affect me. It creates a precedent that will be used against every Muggle-born witch or wizard whose bloodline carries a legitimate connection to an ancient house. It will be used to tell them, as it was used to tell me, that their heritage is real but their claim to it is not." He held the chamber's attention. "That is not what the law says. That is what certain people needed the law to say. There is a difference." He sat down. The silence lasted a moment. Then Josephine Marchbanks said, "The chair recognizes Lord Dumbledore." Dumbledore rose. Harry watched him do it and recognized something he hadn't expected, the genuine effort of it. Not physical effort, though Dumbledore was old. The effort of someone who has been the most important voice in a room for 60 years and has arrived at this moment understanding, perhaps for the first time, that importance and correctness are not the same thing. Members of the Waisengemot, Dumbledore said. His voice had its full quality, resonant, warm, the voice that had shaped magical Britain's understanding of safety and trust and the right side of a war for 3 generations. I will not pretend that what Lord Potter has described did not occur. The record is, as he says, the record. He paused. I acted as I believed was right. I acted to protect a child whom I believed was in danger from forces that a child could not navigate alone. I acted to manage a concentration of power that I feared would make that child a target of those who wished to use it. He looked across the chamber with the clear gaze of someone who has decided to be honest and is finding it both difficult and necessary. I was wrong about the means. I am not certain I was wrong about the danger. But the means were wrong, and the record of those means belongs to this chamber and to Lord Potter, and I will not obstruct the legal consequence of it. He sat down. The chamber was quiet in a different way from before. The quiet of people recalibrating, of people who had built their understanding of safety around one man's certainty encountering that man choosing honesty over self-preservation. It was not, Harry noticed, the silence of people satisfied. It was the silence of people who had just realized that the reassurance they'd been waiting for was not coming, and would have to find another kind of foundation. Good. Foundations should be real. Cornelius Fudge rose without being recognized, which Josephine Marchbanks allowed for approximately 3 seconds before saying, "The floor has not been offered, Minister." Fudge sat back down with the expression of a man who had spent 10 years not being corrected and had forgotten that the rules applied to him. The recognition of the 7 House seats took 45 minutes of procedural work, votes on each House's reactivation, cross-referenced with the documentary record, passed with the majority that Harry's 36 votes and 12 additional allied votes made mathematically certain. It was not a dramatic 45 minutes. It was methodical and correct, and Harry sat through all of it with the patience of someone who understands that legal processes have their pace and the pace is serving him and therefore the pace is fine. The historical administrative review was more complex. Ragnarok was present in the chamber's advisory section, unusual, goblins not typically attending Waisengemot sessions, but Harry had made a formal request through Gringotts legal channel citing the bank's role as documentary witness, and Josephine Marchbanks had upheld the request with the brevity of someone who has read the relevant charter provision and finds the argument sufficient. Ragnarok presented the documentary record in the goblin manner, precise, complete, without embellishment, with the specific authority of an institution that has been keeping records longer than the Waisengemot has existed. The forged black codicil's procedural invalidity, the missing assessment that Narcissa had documented in 2001, went into the record. The Peveril reclassification as Ministry heritage artifacts went into the record. Each of the 7 thefts, documented, cross-referenced, presented in the order they had occurred. When Ragnarok sat, there was a moment in which the chamber had the quality of a room containing an irrefutable fact and not knowing what to do with it. Then Fudge said, "The Ministry's actions were taken in good faith to protect the interests of a minor heir and the stability of magical Britain during a time of war and recovery." His voice had found its ministerial register, the one he used for press conferences and unfavorable votes alike. The Ministry does not accept characterization of these actions as theft. Harry stood. Josephine Marchbanks gave him the floor immediately. "Minister Fudge," Harry said. The Black Estate Codicil invoked a provision of the Ancient Houses Act that requires a formal Waisengemot assessment before it can be applied. That assessment is not in the record. It was never filed. The provision was invoked without the required documentation. He looked at Fudge without heat, without performance. That is not a characterization. That is a procedural fact. The Ministry filed a document citing a legal provision it did not satisfy the requirements for. That is not good faith administration. That is, at a minimum, an error of sufficient severity to void the action, and at maximum, something that requires examination of whether the error was deliberate. He sat down. Fudge's face had gone through several colors during this speech. He settled on a shade that was mostly red with ambitions toward purple. "Are you accusing the ministry of?" "I'm asking the Wisengamot to review the record," Harry said, already seated, not giving Fudge the courtesy of a standing address. "The record will speak to what the ministry did. I don't need to characterize it." Josephine Marchbanks made a note. "The matter of the Ancient Houses Act provision will be referred to the Wisengamot's legal review panel for examination. The minister will have the opportunity to present the ministry's position in that forum." She looked over her glasses at Fudge. "The floor is not yours at this time, Minister." Fudge sat. Harry did not look at him. Fudge was not the main event. Dolores Umbridge was not in the chamber. Harry had noticed her absence when the session opened. He had been expecting her, given that her name was on the list, the third signature on the Peveril reclassification, who had been in the Ministry's Heritage and Historical Artifacts Committee at the relevant time and had co-authored the reclassification order with an efficiency that suggested enthusiasm rather than reluctant compliance. Her absence told him something. He filed it. The Muggle-born Inheritance Act motion was the last item. Hermione had prepared the brief, and Harry presented it using the notes he'd memorized rather than reading from paper, because he had learned in 6 years of Dumbledore's Hogwarts that in a room where authority is contested, the person who can look the room in the eye while speaking holds a different kind of attention than the one who reads. He walked through the argument in the same order Hermione had structured it: the text of the 1910 Act, the specific silence on transmissibility, the history of how the non-transmissibility interpretation had been introduced through a 1998 subcommittee ruling rather than through any formal amendment process, the cases where it had subsequently been cited, the effect of those citations on Muggle-born inheritance claims in the period 1998 to present. He presented his mother's research as evidence of independent scholarly confirmation of the bloodline connection, not as a personal document, as a legal exhibit, the way it deserved to be used. When he reached the last section of the argument, the one Hermione had titled Consequence and Precedent, he set his notes aside entirely. If the 1910 Act says nothing about transmissibility, he said, then the 1998 subcommittee ruling invented a restriction that has no legislative basis. Every inheritance claim denied on that basis since 1998 is challengeable. Every Muggle-born witch or wizard told their bloodline connection to an ancient house carries no legal weight was told something that the law does not say. He looked across the chamber. This chamber has the authority to refer the 1998 ruling for legislative review and to suspend its application pending that review. I am asking you to do that. He paused. Not for me. The Ravenclaw claim is already recognized, the Heritage Committee ruled on it. I'm asking for the principle. For the people who don't have 36 Wisengamot votes and a Gringotts legal team. For the people who had what my mother had, a legitimate claim, and insufficient standing to exercise it. He sat. The vote on the motion to suspend and review the 1998 ruling took place after 30 minutes of debate that Harry listened to with the focused attention of someone taking notes. 6 members spoke against, 3 of them citing the disruption to established precedent, which Harry translated as "we have been using this precedent conveniently and would like to continue." 9 members spoke in favor, including, to the surprise of several people in the room, Marcus Longbottom, who rose in the older tier with the measured deliberateness of a man who had spent decades waiting for the correct moment and had identified this as it. My house has benefited, Marcus Longbottom said, his voice the specific dry authority of someone who has earned his opinions through careful thought, from certain inheritance interpretations that I suspect would not survive the scrutiny being applied here today. I am not proud of that benefit. I am choosing today to vote for the scrutiny rather than the benefit. He sat. The chamber was quiet in the way it gets when something honest has been said by someone from whom honesty was not the expected commodity. The vote carried. 41-18, with 7 abstentions. Josephine Marchbanks noted the result, noted the referral to the Legislative Review Panel, and moved to the final matter on the order paper, a motion filed by Harry that he had not discussed publicly, that had been added to the agenda through Gringotts' channel at the last possible moment before the session's agenda was finalized. The motion called for the establishment of a Waisengemot Oversight Committee with the specific mandate of reviewing administrative decisions affecting minor heirs' estates during the period 1981 to present, with particular attention to decisions made during periods of formal magical guardianship. Dumbledore looked at Harry when the motion was read. Harry met his eyes, and did not look away. This motion, Harry said, standing for the last time, is not about punishment. I want to be clear about that. It is about architecture. The thefts that occurred in my case were possible because there was no oversight mechanism designed to catch them. A guardian could act without accountability. A ministry official could file documents without a second review. A subcommittee could meet at 8 in the morning and vote on 100 things in 2 hours with no one watching. He looked across the chamber. The people who used that architecture to steal from me were wrong. But so was the architecture. The motion asks this chamber to build something better. A mechanism that would catch this if it happened again. So that another child, Muggle-born, half-blood, pure-blood, doesn't matter, cannot have their inheritance, their identity, and their capacity quietly, legally removed while the people responsible tell themselves it's for the greater good. He sat. The greater good. He had said it deliberately and the chamber had heard it deliberately, and several pairs of eyes moved to Dumbledore, who sat with the stillness of someone receiving something that is accurate and has chosen to receive it fully rather than deflect. The motion carried. 52-13. The largest majority of the session. Josephine Marchbanks closed the session with the brevity of someone who considers closing remarks unnecessary when the record speaks clearly. She gathered her papers. Stood. Left the chair without ceremony. The chamber broke into the particular noise of a significant session ending, the sound of 50 people who have just been part of something that will be in the record books beginning to process what they've done. Harry sat in the Potter's seat and let it happen around him, not rushing, not performing anything. He was tired in the specific way of someone who has spent a week running on purpose and adrenaline and has just crossed the finish line of the immediate stage and can feel their body noticing. Neville appeared at his shoulder. "How do you feel?" he asked. Harry thought about it honestly. "Like we did what we came to do," he said. Neville sat in the adjacent empty seat. "All 7, he said. "Formally recognized. Legally secure. Ragnarok's team will have the account reclamations through within the week." He paused. "It worked, Harry." "We worked," Harry said. He looked at Neville directly. "I mean that." Neville made the expression he made when he was genuinely moved and trying not to make a production of it. He looked at the chamber floor. "Marcus stayed," he said. "After the vote. He asked me to tell Gran something." "What?" He said, "Tell Augusta she raised someone I respect." Neville's voice was controlled. "I don't know what to do with that." "Maybe just let it be what it is," Harry said. "Yeah." Neville was quiet for a moment. "Yeah." Hermione reached Harry at the chamber door. She was carrying her folder and her expression had the quality it got after a very large exam, not quite relaxed, but settled, the anxiety of anticipation replaced by the cleaner feeling of a thing completed. She hugged him, which was brief and fierce and not a thing she needed to explain. "The act motion," she said, when she stepped back. 41-18. "Your argument was the reason," Harry said. She shook her head. "Your mother's research was the reason. I just organized it into Waisengemot language." She paused. "She was extraordinary, Harry." "Yes," he said. "She was." Ron was waiting further down the corridor, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets. He looked at Harry as Harry approached, and something in his expression was the relief of someone who has been holding their breath in a specific place for a long time and has been told they can stop. "Percy's going to be all right," Ron said. I mean, he's got things to answer for. But Mum talked to him last night. He didn't know what he was signing. He's not all right now, but he will be." "Good," Harry said. Ron looked at the floor. "Thank you," he said. "For how you handled it. For the way you separated what he did from who he is." "He's your brother," Harry said. Ron looked up. "He's also a prat who asks too few questions." "Yeah," Harry said. "Both things." Ron almost smiled. It was enough. Dumbledore found Harry in the corridor outside the chamber as the crowd from the session dispersed in multiple directions, which Harry suspected had been timed deliberately, the specific window when they were effectively alone without being in a private room. It was a Dumbledore calculation. Harry noted it without resentment. "A word, if you would," Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. They moved to a small alcove off the main corridor, stone walls, a window that looked onto the Ministry's internal atrium, the abstract gold of the fountain visible below. Dumbledore stood with his hands clasped in front of him, which was not his usual posture and suggested deliberate choice. "I want to tell you," Dumbledore said, "that what you did today was among the most accomplished pieces of political and legal work I have witnessed in this chamber. And I have been a member of this chamber for 63 years. Harry looked at him. Waited. "That is not a deflection," Dumbledore said, with the faint self-awareness of someone who has had to learn to flag the difference. "I mean it simply. The structure of the argument, the sequencing of the motions, the decision to end with the oversight mechanism rather than the personal reclamation, that was the decision of someone who understands that the architecture matters more than the individual correction." He paused. "Your mother would have done exactly that." "You said something like that at the Leaky Cauldron," Harry said. "I keep saying it because it keeps being true." Dumbledore looked at him with the blue eyes that Harry could now read with full clarity, not the warmth that was partly performance, not the deliberate projection of wisdom, but the eyes of a very old man who has spent a week in honest reckoning and emerged from it without the certainties he went in with. "I owe you an apology that I suspect no language is adequate to." "I know," Harry said. "I am going to give it anyway." Dumbledore straightened slightly, not with performance, with the posture of someone who has decided that the cost of the next few words is what it is and will be paid. "I treated you as a piece in a game I believed I was the only one qualified to play. I convinced myself that the game's stakes justified the means, and I stopped asking whether the means were right because I had stopped asking whether my judgment was fallible. I was not protecting you. I was managing you. The distinction matters enormously, and I did not make it." Harry held this. "Let it settle." "Do you understand why it matters?" he said. "Not strategically. Actually." Dumbledore considered the question with the thoroughness of someone who has learned not to answer before they're certain. "Because you are not a piece," he said. "You are a person. And a person's autonomy, their right to know who they are and what is theirs, is not negotiable regardless of what is at stake. I knew this. I believe I knew it my entire life. I did not apply it when it mattered most." He looked at Harry quietly. "I am sorry." Thoroughly and without qualification. Harry stood in the alcove for a moment. He thought about 48 loyalty blocks and the night Hedwig screamed. He thought about his mother's research in a locked drawer, his father's letter in a Gringotts envelope, portraits returning to their frames through means nobody quite explained. He thought about Neville in the Heritage Committee meeting, presenting Marcus Longbottom's family history with the confidence of someone who has finally found his spine. Hermione's legal brief. Ron sitting in the gallery. Narcissa Malfoy's folder. Draco's careful notes from the upper gallery. He thought about a world that was larger and more complicated than the one he'd lived in a week ago, and how that complexity had produced not only the people who had stolen from him but the people who had, in their various ways and for their various reasons, been working against the theft for years, waiting for someone with standing to complete what they'd begun. He looked at Dumbledore. The man who had been, simultaneously, the source of most of the harm and the source of much of what had made Harry capable of surviving it. That was, Harry thought, possibly the most human thing about him. "I accept it," Harry said. Not because it's enough. It isn't. But because we have a war to finish, and I need you to be useful rather than in a cell, and because," he paused. "Because I don't think you're beyond better." Something moved in Dumbledore's expression that was too genuine to have been prepared. "What does useful look like?" Dumbledore asked. "Tell me everything you know about Voldemort's Horcruxes," Harry said. "Everything. Not the managed version. Not what you decided I needed to know. Everything." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "When would you like to begin?" "Tomorrow," Harry said. "Potter Manor. You'll be a guest in my house for a change." The ghost of something moved across Dumbledore's face that was very close to rueful. "As you wish," he said. Harry left the alcove and walked back into the corridor, and the Ministry of Magic went about its business around him, the hum and motion of a bureaucracy enormous enough to contain both extraordinary justice and extraordinary failure, usually simultaneously. He had just made it do one and document the other, and tomorrow he would begin the next stage of the thing that had always been the actual war, the one that existed underneath all the politics and paperwork, the one Voldemort would not be patient enough to wait for him to finish. He was ready for that too. Outside the ministry, in the afternoon sun, Hedwig was waiting on a post box with the specific quality of someone who has been there a while and finds the waiting perfectly acceptable. Harry stopped. "Were you following me?" he said. She turned her head with enormous dignity. Looked down the street. Looked back at him. The amber eyes carried, as they always had, something vast and warm and older than the institution he'd just spent the morning rearranging. "You could have come inside," he said. "I'd have brought you." She ruffled her feathers in a way that communicated, clearly, that she had been precisely where she intended to be and did not require his commentary on the decision. Harry laughed, real and full, the laugh that had started coming back 3 days ago and was becoming increasingly his own. He held his arm out. She came to it, her weight familiar and exact, her talons careful. 7 rings caught the afternoon sun. Red and silver and pale gold and deep gold and gray and dark green and the clear, striking blue of something that had always been there, waiting only for permission to be seen. The rings of 7 houses, stolen, reclaimed, recognized, seated, voted, and alive. He thought about the letter in his chest pocket. His mother's margin note. You don't have to earn what's already yours. He hadn't earned any of it, not in the sense of deserving it through performance, through sufficient heroism, through proving himself to the satisfaction of people who had appointed themselves his judges. He'd claimed it. Shown up, read the documents, walked through the houses, stood in the chamber and told the truth, and let the magic confirm what it had always known. That was all it had ever needed. Right, he said, to Hedwig, to the afternoon, to the long open road of what came next. Potter Manor tonight. Dumbledore tomorrow. Voldemort eventually. He looked at the clear blue of the London sky. We've got time. She clicked her beak once, warm and certain, the sound she made when she was satisfied with how things had gone. Not triumphant, satisfied. There was a difference, and the difference mattered, and Harry understood it now the way he understood most things that had always been true and had only just become available to him. He operat home. To his home. To the manor in its valley, with the oak tree and the overgrown garden and the portraits and the library and Minky's exceptional cooking and his mother's study on the 2nd floor, 3rd door on the left. The wards welcomed him. They always would.